Gentlemen, please welcome the chair of the board of the America First Policy Institute and former administrator of the Small Business Administration, the Honorable Linda McMahon.
Well, good morning, everyone. We'd certainly like to welcome you here to our AFPI headquarters in Washington, D.C. Now, I know all of you know you're in Washington, D.C., but we have many people watching us on live stream this morning, so I'd like to welcome them as well. We are certainly here to discuss a very somber but a very important issue today. That's the fentanyl crisis that's affecting our country and what we can do to help fight it. I went with Chad Wolf, former acting Secretary for Homeland Security. Excuse me, Chad, for botching that this morning. But I went with him to the border, and I saw all of the people who are trying to come into our country. I saw it firsthand. And we know that a lot of those people, when they're coming in, they bring drugs with them. We know that the cartels are bringing drugs in and selling them in our country, and we know what it's doing. We have a fundamental problem in this country right now, and that's our communities and our small towns. They've been hollowed out. In the 1990s, factories moved overseas, destroying jobs and the main source of income for so many families here in our country. The rise of social media and the online world has made it harder for folks to make connections in the real world, and the fentanyl crisis is another piece of this. As many people lost their jobs, they lost their sense of camaraderie with their neighbors. Some gave up hope, and some turned to dangerous drug use, which our enemies have been all too willing to supply. And let's listen to that word. They are our enemies. We must reverse this tide in order to truly rebuild our country. So today we have such a wonderful program for you. We appreciate your being here. It's going to be very informational certainly for a lot of us here at AFPI, and I'm really looking forward to it. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce Chad Wolf to you, our amazing executive director, who will walk you through what today's panels and things are going to be about. So thank you for being here. Chad Wolf.
Well, thank you, Linda, for those opening remarks. And again, good morning to everyone here in D.C. Thanks for being in attendance and those that are live streaming. Today's event, Combating Fentanyl, the America First Action Plan, is the America First Policy Institute's response to the current fentanyl poisoning crisis that is impacting our country like never before. And while I wish an event like this wouldn't be necessary, it does underscore the importance of AFPI, a single policy institute that can draw upon a wide array of subject matter experts who can collaborate on topics and cut across multiple issues and disciplines. Today's discussion will cover much of the substance contained in that America First Action Plan that each of you received when you arrived today. It should have been in your seats. Here at AFPI, we don't just highlight the problems. We offer solutions that have the best interest of the American people at heart. The America First solution to solving the fentanyl poisoning epidemic involves 4 key areas I'll touch on briefly. First, we must secure the border to stop the drug flow into our nation and to punish the Mexican drug cartels, who should be public enemy number 1 for targeting our youth with the scourge of fentanyl. Second, we need to get tough on China, because they are the origin of nearly all of the fentanyl precursors, which are the substances used to make fentanyl that ends up in our nation's communities. Third, we must implement stricter law enforcement penalties for those that take any role in manufacturing and distribution of fentanyl. In other words, we need common sense deterrent measures in place to rid our streets of fentanyl. And finally, we need to target the scourge of fentanyl poisoning through our education and our public health systems. There are too many children and parents in our country that discover the deadly consequences of fentanyl before they are even aware that the drug exists. So unlike the opioid crisis of recent memory fueled by the predatory practices of the U.S. pharmaceutical industry, the current crisis is driven by fentanyl precursors, chemicals manufactured in China, sent to the Mexican drug cartels, who then exploit a very open southern border to flood our communities with this poison. Our first panel of experts today will be on China and the Mexican cartels. They will expose the origin of the fentanyl crisis and epidemic, and they will offer solutions for stopping this poison from ever entering our country. The sad reality is that nearly all Americans have had a loved one, a friend, or a family member that have been impacted over the last few years. Fentanyl is the leading cause of death among young adults. The drug is also responsible for making American communities across this country less safe and straining local law enforcement resources. Our second panel of experts will explore the public health impacts of fentanyl once it makes its way into the U.S., as well as the impact on crime around the country. But first, to kick things off, we've decided to have an intimate discussion led by AFPI's Pam Bondi, chair of our Constitutional Litigation Partnership, co-chair of the Center for Law and Justice, and the former Attorney General of Florida, to underscore the personal impact of fentanyl stealing our loved ones too soon, and to highlight the commendable efforts of state officials who work tirelessly to get fentanyl off our streets. So again, welcome, thank you for being here, and please help me in welcoming Pam Bondi to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for being here. And if I could echo anything that Chad said, fentanyl is the #1 killer now among our kids. That's crazy. So if all of you today can help us and push this out, if we can save one life here today, which I know we can, that's how you start. If we can save one life, all of this is more than worth it. So just please send this out to anyone you know, grandparents, parents, teenagers, kids in their 20s, 30s. You can truly help someone. This epidemic really started, it's been around a while. The end of my last term was when I first heard of it, and people were saying that fentanyl was just medical, used in hospitals. They didn't get it. They didn't get what was happening and what was about to happen to our country. So we really wanted to personalize it for you today. And the only way to do that is to bring in a remarkable woman. And her name is Stephanie Turner. She's from Austin, Texas. And Stephanie, you know, it's people handle tragedies in different ways. And Stephanie has been truly an incredibly strong woman. The way she handled the tragedy of losing her beautiful 19-year-old son was to try to save other families and other kids from dying. So it's my honor to welcome Stephanie Turner. And next is my former colleague and good friend, Dave Yost. Dave is the amazing Attorney General for the state of Ohio. And Dave is going to tell you about something. General Yost is personally responsible for saving a tremendous amount of lives, working with law enforcement on a recent bust that they just made in Ohio, and I'm going to let Dave tell you all about that. So it's my honor to welcome Attorney General of Ohio, Dave Yost. So Stephanie, I'm going to start with you. Tell me, how old was Tucker? Tell us a little bit about Tucker's story.
Okay. My son Tucker was 19 and a half years old when he was found dead from illicit fentanyl. He took one pill. And a little bit about Tucker's story is he was born a bright-eyed, blonde hair, adventurous, curious boy with a love for life, but a love to explore and press the limits. And I always say boys take risks that my girls never would. They jump out of trees and realize they shouldn't have after they broke their ankle. Or where a girl's like, I'm not gonna jump, I might hurt myself. And we know that brains aren't formed. And a 19-and-a-half-year-old brain wasn't formed, and he did not understand the dangers of trying things. So I think he lived a little on the wild side. After he graduated high school, he wasn't sure what he wanted to do with his life. And he started working with his dad, who has a construction company. but kind of struggling as like an 18-year-old, what's next? My friends are all going to college and just living like, what do I do? So at almost 19 years old, he went to a New Year's Eve party and he was offered a Xanax pill. And him and I were really close. We grew up in a very close home. He has 3 younger sisters. He has a bonus dad that he loved so much, and he had a close relationship with his father. He came home from that party and he told me about it. He told me, Mom, I took a pill at the party, and we talked about not taking prescription medication, because that's what he told me it was, a Xanax. And 2.5 years ago, that's what I thought it was, and that's what he thought it was. At the end of January, he broke his hand, so he wasn't able to work. And I noticed a change in his behavior that I kind of chalked up as a mom to depression. He can't work, he's not making money, he has a broken hand, he's sleeping more. I asked him, are you smoking weed? You know, I noticed a change in his behavior. And he said he was taking Xanax, that he believed was taking Xanax. 2 months into that, my son, I found seconds away from death. He had taken a half of a pill to help him sleep. And I immediately called 911, and he was administered naloxone. That immediately saved his life, but that's when I first learned what fentanyl was. So now he's 19 years old, and suddenly there's this drug that they're telling me about that I knew nothing about, that my son knew nothing about. So he went to a treatment center, and a couple weeks into that treatment center, he told me, Mom, the person who is selling these pills just posted at his friend's funeral and said, rest in peace. And the very next picture were pills he had for sale. This was a 19-year-old boy saying, rest in peace, but then the next, here's some pills. So he told me his name, and I immediately contacted law enforcement. That was in March of 2021. Tucker went on to struggle with his sobriety, and he went to another treatment center. And this kid I'm following on social media, and he's posted up, you know, new pack is just in, I'm doing good numbers. He'll say, feds are on my ass and I'm still getting money. He's boasting about this. I could look at this like, okay, here's this 19-year-old kid selling drugs who's boasting about it, but he's a drug addict. He's selling drugs because of his own addiction. He's killing people. You know, Tucker told him, hey, you're selling stuff that it's not what you say it is. You said it was Xanax. And that's what he truly believed it was in the beginning. I think it's important that we understand that. Our kids are being deceived, but we're being deceived. We don't understand the depths of it. We don't understand how strong fentanyl is, how it changes the chemistry of the brain, how it causes this flood of dopamine, and then those kids use it again. And on the outside, we judge that. Right? We judge, like, why would, you said your son is smart, why would he choose to use that? Well, he's not choosing to use it out of a level of intelligence. It shows the effect of the drug. It shows how lethal, how poisonous. And I am outraged that this isn't being talked about. I'm outraged that there's a poison that's killing our kids that we don't even as adults have an understanding to educate on, and it's not being talked about. So thank you guys for this, and thank you for bringing this. But I'll wrap up Tucker's story because I get really passionate about it. And but after 4 months of sobriety, and Tucker living what I would say as his mom, his best life, that point when your kids grow up and you're like you kind of can take a breath. That's what I felt like, man, he's turned a corner and we're on to the next thing. So 2 days before his triathlon, he came to my house after he went to the gym that night. And he said hello, and I sent him home with some food because he said, Mom, I don't think I'm eating enough for my triathlon training. And I walked him out to my porch, and he was extremely loving that night. He was always a really loving boy, but really snuggly, and I always thought that meant he was good. When he was really leaning in with love, as a mom, I thought, that's good. But I think those were the times when he was struggling the most with his anxiety and he was leaning in because he needed his mama. So I told him goodbye, and I told him I love you so much, and I'll see you tomorrow. And tomorrow came, and I told him good morning and asked if he liked his ribs, and he didn't respond. That was at like 6 in the morning, and 4 hours later, his dad called me and said Tucker didn't show up to work, and it's past the time of just sleeping in, and that wasn't typical for him. And I said, we'll call his roommate, and he did, and his roommate said that his light was on and she would check on him. And she didn't call us back, and 45 minutes had passed, so I left work and I drove to his house, and I had no thought that this could be the outcome. So I wasn't worried. I spent, through his using, I spent time worried about that, but I wasn't worried. And I turned the corner, and there was about 10 police officers with no lights on. And they were all standing on the porch, and I had texted his roommate, I'm coming to check on Tuck. And I said, oh, my baby. And there was a man putting on gloves, and he said, he's gone. And he said, ma'am, I just got here. And I said, no, I know. So that's my story. That's how I found out about my son. And, as a mom, as a parent, that is the worst possible thing that I think every parent fears, right? We have these beautiful gifts that are given to us to raise, to love, to grow, encourage, to support. And I feel that I did that. I'm not saying I was a perfect mom. No one is. But I know I was a good mom. And I know I had a good relationship with him. And I know he had a good family and a good friends and a good network. And we're loved in our community. And none of that was enough. We had resources to give him help. That wasn't enough. And so that's what I really want every parent in America to know right now, that it doesn't discriminate and it doesn't look a certain way. Your kid could go home and go to bed at night, and you walk in the morning and they're gone. This is how it's happening. So.
And Stephanie, he's a victim. And I just want to show everyone, if you can't see her arm, I think his picture's up there, but this is beautiful Tucker, who the world lost at age 19 in 2021. And thank you for making a difference. And like you are a great mom. He had a great dad, a great stepdad. And I think the most frightening part about fentanyl is you thought he was doing better. He was training for a triathlon. And then this happens. So that's why I think we have to all just have super awareness with all of our kids and anything we can do. There is nothing that you could have done because of these drug dealers that are out there. And General Yost, you are our champion today because you made a huge bust in Ohio working with law enforcement. And, these drug dealers now are reaching a new low, if that's even possible. We know they're targeting our kids. And it used to be, don't buy a Xanax on the street, don't buy an Adderall on the street, which is the drug of choice for college kids to study with, because it could be laced with fentanyl. But now, will you tell us a little bit about your bust, about what you did in Ohio? And thank you for what you did.
So a week doesn't, I'm so moved by your story. A week doesn't go by that we don't have a major weight seizure somewhere in the state of Ohio of fentanyl, enough to wipe out a city. And now we have a new trick that we're seeing on the street from the drug dealers trying to ever expand their market. It's been nicknamed rainbow fentanyl. But it's fentanyl tablets that are colored to look like Skittles or Sweet Tarts. I wonder, do we have a picture of it? And you can see that. That's all fentanyl. And this was the first time we had seen it in Ohio in March. But it's designed, obviously, you can look at it and confirm what the DEA has told us nationally, that this is an attempt to make it less threatening and more marketable to young people. Fentanyl is, I appreciate what you said about the change that happens in the neural pathways. We've got a pharmacologist that works on our staff who can detail this, but all of the just say no in the world won't make a difference after your dopamine pathways and the receptors in your brain have been altered by this stuff. You know where it came from? Over the border. We traced this shipment that's on the screen back to Mexico. We've got 2 people in custody. I'm not putting up the mug shots or any further details because it's an ongoing operation. But the bottom line is our border is wide open. You know, Ohio, north of the Ohio River, I mean, you go across Lake Erie in my state and you're in Canada. You would think that's hardly, you know, a border state like what Texas and Florida have to deal with, and Arizona. But here's the truth. Every state is a border state now, and the fentanyl that we're all seeing is coming right across from Mexico. It's a direct result of the malfeasance, the misfeasance that we're seeing out of Washington, D.C.
In general, do you believe that it's so well organized? It comes through Mexico. How does it make it to Ohio?
So they've got these delivery chains and distribution centers, and then you know, on the local level, it's dial it up, and they deliver it to you. But it's coming right across the border and up through our highway systems into every town in America.
Kids are getting it delivered right to their front door.
Oh, yeah.
Your kid doesn't even have to leave their home, and they can have these pills easier than ordering a pizza.
And that's why, I mean, I always say your child has no right to privacy on the internet. I've always said that. Because you have to at least talk to them and monitor what they're doing. There is no way you look at those pills and think that's fentanyl. No way. General thinks they look like Skittles. I think they look like Sweet Tarts. They look like a child's candy. And that's not targeting a 40-year-old man. That's targeting a kid. And these are orchestrated, well-organized cartels now in our country trying to kill not only our youth, but so many adults as well. Stephanie, since the passing of Tucker, you have truly, I say, an activist. You've become just incredibly outspoken in such a beautiful way, trying to save other children and protect other parents. Tell us a little bit about your efforts there.
Okay, so I formed a nonprofit called Texas Against Fentanyl, and really the start of it was just to spread awareness in my community. I went to the school and wanted to talk about it, and I was told that I didn't have a nonprofit. So I titled it Texas Against Fentanyl, so everyone who has lost someone to fentanyl that wants to talk about it has a nonprofit. And that's kind of how it began, but it's so much bigger than that. We started working on a curriculum for schools, for all schools, and it's going to be rolled out cross-curricular in all subjects. So we're building that at the same time that we're pushing for legislation to bring in fentanyl education.
Is that Tucker's Law?
Yes, that's a Tucker.
Tell us about that.
Okay. So we are pushing for fentanyl education because we know we can't stop the cartels. Our government's not doing anything to stop the cartels, so we have to bring in the education effort. Parents don't know about it. Our kids know more about fentanyl and drugs and how to get it than we do as adults. So there's this lack of knowledge that adults have, and so that was where I became passionate on the education part. I always use the analogy, kids, if you offered them heroin, would say no because they have been educated. We have been educated on the dangers of heroin. Fentanyl is 50 times stronger than heroin, and no one's educating our kids or us about it. So we're pushing for fentanyl education. It got passed in the state of Texas. It's requiring grades 6 through 12 to bring this into the classroom. And that's our education part of Texas Against Fentanyl. That's our initiative, but that's not all that Texas Against Fentanyl is doing. We're looking at this as a holistic approach. So we're using our curriculum to leverage communities, to go into the communities, using the schools to bring in the awareness, to get with community leaders and bring in local and federal agencies, as well as bring in other nonprofits who are fighting this and giving them a platform to share their loved one's story. So another part of our Texas Against Fentanyl, we have angel families, and our angel family networks have been equipped to share their story. And so we all partner together and have support in our grief, and we're stronger together. Because this drug is really tricky. There's the guilt and shame part of it. So people aren't speaking about it, and they're not sharing their loved one's story. Some families don't even want to tell people what happened. There's like, oh, I can't, it's a drug and that is bad. So our angel family networks come in and bring that support where we can spread awareness and stand up and be stronger together and use our voice and drive legislation change, because our lawmakers don't know this is happening. So, you know, when I went to the Capitol and knocked on doors and talked to each representative, each senator, explained what's happening, explained the struggles I was having, they were like, whoa, what can we do about this? And that's how we got Tucker's Law. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, when I started talking to lawmakers years ago in Florida, they kept saying, this is used in hospitals. This is used during surgery, and it's not. And what brought awareness to me was in a neighboring county where I'm from. In 5 days, 3 young men dropped dead, and they thought they were buying, I can't remember what it was, either an Adderall or a Xanax, and it was laced with fentanyl. And so it's all about awareness now. And again, you know, they have pill presses out there. If you look online, your kids, I tell kids, don't take a Tylenol from someone who you don't know, because it could be laced with something. General Yost, I know you made tremendous efforts on the educational front as well, especially in Ohio with everything. Can you talk to us and give parents and families some warnings and talk about some things that you've done on that front as well?
Sure, and we're doing some things we're getting ready to roll out nationally about helping to educate medical professionals. Because one of the things we found in our research was that there is an amazing variability in the level of information that our medical professionals have about recognizing use disorders and addiction, much less how their practices impact that. But here's the number one thing to take away. We run the drug testing labs in my state for statewide. We have not found any drug that is abused, all the way down to marijuana, cannabis, that hasn't been laced with fentanyl. Every single thing, it's worked its way into the supply chain, and you've got no idea what it is. If your doctor didn't give it to you, by a prescription, you have no idea what you're putting into your body. So the message to kids, to parents, to grandparents, if there's somebody you love, remind them that one pill can kill. It is simply not worth the risk. Along with that is the variability in strength. So General Bondi asked me backstage, you know, with the rainbow fentanyl, you know, how toxic is that? How potent is that? And the answer is, it depends. It depends on the shipment. It depends on the pill. Look, the drug cartels do not have quality control programs. They don't even know whether this first pill has the same contents as this 301st pill from the same batch. So you're literally playing Russian roulette every time you take a drug that you got off the street, even if it was from a friend, even if it was from somebody you trust. They don't know. They don't have any way to know. One pill can kill.
In 2022, the DEA, of all pills seized by the DEA, 99% of them contained fentanyl. And 60% of all of those pills contained a lethal amount of fentanyl. So we don't have a pill problem, pharmaceutical pill problem. We have an illicit pill problem.
And if you take, oh, I did this when I was AG because I had to fight my own party on getting penalties tougher because it was right when fentanyl was breaking in the market. I had FDLE, Florida Department of Law Enforcement, put salt, sodium chloride, in a vial. And you could barely see it. It looked like 7, 8 grains. And that was the amount of fentanyl it took to kill you. To kill you. So like General Yost said, these drug dealers aren't back there with a scale measuring, oh, let me put 2 grains in. That'll only get them high and addicted for the rest of their lives. They're just throwing it in. And I have also seen crime scene photos of, they're not making this in a sterile lab. I've seen crime scene photos, it's disgusting, on dirty wood floors with roaches and brooms. And that's how they're mixing this stuff up and putting it in pills.
1 packet of sugar is enough to kill 500 people.
I think, yeah. If it's pure fentanyl, even more. A whole room of people, right? Right. If there's anything else that each of you would like, just the public, all of our audience, to know, any message. General Yost, I'll start with you.
As we talk about the policies, I mean, it's so easy. We'll start or finish where we began. It's so easy to get clinical and almost technical, thinking about the law and the border and securing, what policies should we be doing. When you were talking about showing up to the scene and there's multiple cars and no lights are on, that struck me because a friend of mine who I've known for 40 years called me one day out of the blue and said his son, he was afraid he had lost his son. The cops wouldn't let him into the house. He was sobbing. This is an intelligent man whose grown son, he'd battled with addiction. And he was reaching out to me because he had no idea what to do or what was going on. And I rolled up that same scene. I'm used to going to crime scenes where there's all the lights and sirens and the searchlights and the techs are all. But there's a strange quietness to an overdose scene, and all of these things are so personal to individual families, but to our communities. We are having a worse impact every year than if we had the whole Vietnam War. Every year. Where are the protests? Where's the outrage? Where's the people in the streets saying we need to secure our border? It's time that this stops.
Absolutely. I use the analogy, if a plane crashed into the World Trade Center every single day, would we be concerned as a nation? Would we want to talk about it? Would it be breaking news? It would, and that's the number of deaths every single day. So my takeaway that I want to leave you all with is this is war. We are at war. It is a silent war, and we need to stand up. We need to fight against this. We need to understand that our children are being used as casualties in this war. Our children are being targeted. It is a weapon of mass destruction. It is coming. It is shifting form. They're adding xylazine to it, and it will continue to happen if we allow it. We know where it's coming from. We know where it's coming from. Why is that not labeled a terrorist? The cartels are terrorist organizations, and they're killing Americans, and they killed my son, and I'm mad about it.
And there are going to be countless moms today who are going to go through what Stephanie went through. And you can prevent one of those from happening, just one. I mean, think of the multiple lives that you've saved by doing this and being such a fighter. So we commend you so much, and General, thank you for keeping up the fight and protecting our children. And it's not just our children, all of our citizens. And again, please spread the word. You can save a life today. Thank you all so much.
Thank you, guys.
Well, it's my pleasure to announce our first panel. We have Congressman Mark Green, Chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee. The chairman is running a few minutes late. He's tied up with some congressional business, but will be joining the panel as soon as he arrives. Chairman Green graduated from West Point, successful business leader, decorated veteran, an ER physician, a man of many hats. So we are really excited as the chairman of the House Homeland Security Committee, as a member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. I can't think of a better member to talk about this issue as it relates to the homeland, but also as it relates to China. So we are very excited to have Chairman Green when he arrives. Let me welcome to the stage Rodney Scott. Rodney is a Texas Public Policy Foundation Senior Distinguished Fellow. He is also the 24th Chief of the United States Border Patrol. He spent over 3 decades at DHS and with the Border Patrol, so I listened to him as acting secretary. I hope you do too. He has some very important points and unique perspective to lend to this discussion as well. So maybe if we can get Rodney out here. He's somewhere lurking in the back. There we go. Okay. And then let me bring to the stage Steve Yates. Steve is a senior fellow and chair of the China Policy Initiative here at the America First Policy Institute. Steve was an assistant, you guys can have a seat. Steve was an assistant to Vice President Dick Cheney, National Security Council, and has visited China and has been really involved in U.S.-China relations for some period of time, is the resident expert here at AFPI. So again, very excited to have him to the stage. And then I'll introduce and conclude with the moderator is Rob Law. Rob is the director here at AFPI for our Center for Homeland Security and Immigration. He served in the Trump administration as a senior official at the United States Citizenship and Immigration Services, that's USCIS. And he is all things Homeland Security and Immigration here at AFPI. So excited to have him on board, and we'll turn the panel over to Rob.
Thanks for the introduction, Chad. And as the father of 2 young kids, hearing Stephanie's story was just really, really gut-wrenching. But just so commendable to share it and to try to prevent that from happening to anybody else's kids in the future. At the end of our panel, we will have a time to do some Q&A with the crowd. So hopefully our thought-provoking commentary will lead to some questions that we can pass along to the experts. But I did want to let you all know that we should have time for about 10 minutes of Q&A at the end. So Steve, my colleague, my China expert here at AFPI, let me start with you. You are all over the airwaves, TV, radio, talking all things China. You've recently said that China is poisoning America with fentanyl. Meanwhile, Janet Yellen from the current administration was just over there, and I believe she considered China a, quote, healthy economic competitor. Where's the disconnect between the way you're characterizing China versus the current administration?
Well, thank you. I actually think the Secretary of Treasury might be mistaken. This is a very, very difficult subject to talk about. I mean, we're really talking about life and death. And in my family, the way I was raised, the way our coping mechanisms were humor and sarcasms and snark, and so forgive me if some of that comes through. It's a coping mechanism because this is something that I think is a deep form of evil. A friend of mine named John Moody was a senior executive at Fox. He wrote a book about COVID, and the title of the book is "Of Course They Knew." Of course they, ... And with the greatest surveillance state known to mankind, one that can stamp out anyone that posts a picture of Winnie the Pooh on their social media, thinking it's a criticism of their dear leader. They knew where COVID came from, they knew what they were doing, and they know who's doing what with fentanyl. And if it was a priority to them, they could at least slow it, if not control it. And this isn't just a thesis or an assertion. When a president of the United States makes something a priority, other leaders take note. And our former president, when they were in the midst of trade negotiations and had the Chinese leadership's full attention, made a priority of planting a flag about stopping the poisoning of America's youth. And for a time, the Chinese leadership somehow found a way to figure out who was doing what with whom, and it at least slowed. So we have some evidence of this. And in my past life, we could see the same movie play out on North Korea and other kinds of things. So there's no substitute for having a president of the United States actually make something a priority and put it in play with other world leaders. But second, we're dealing with a collaboration with cartels. Now, in most of my career, I was asked to be an expert on Chinese decision-making, leadership, spoke the language, got involved enough that they won't allow me to go anymore because apparently you're not allowed to have an independent opinion and still go to China and deal freely with people. This collaboration with cartels, I think, is something that was not expected. And so the mandarins in charge of China policy for decades always thought of it as just a bilateral relationship. But as their leaders wanted kind of the stink of fentanyl and other kinds of things to take distance from them, they found two very convenient ways to collaborate with cartels. One involves the product, and we heard some mention of that. We'll hear more mention of actually how precursors make it out of China and into the flow that comes up through our southern border. The other is in money laundering. This is another area of entrepreneurship between organized crime in China. Again, just like my friend John Moody said, of course they know. They know who's moving the money. They have tight controls on money in China to try to keep it from getting out. And so if someone is moving large quantities of money, they know, odds are it's their relatives or other wealthy people in China involved. But supposedly, according to several experts, Republican and Democrat, the new entrant into the money laundering business from China vastly undercut some of the former Middle East providers of such services. And so it's not just in retail goods that China can undercut price and kind of dump in a market and take over. In this illicit market of money laundering and moving the product, China has moved in a big way, and it's something that's very, very different. I would just do it with one more point that is very different about this. I lived through the COVID experience, and Americans, shockingly to me, had a very difficult time trying to put responsibility where it goes. But if you have a government that does not have any respect for human dignity, doesn't have any ethics, is accountable to no one, how shocked can you be that they engage in dangerous experimentation and development of things to make them much more addictive, more deadly, and then exercise the control so that they don't have an epidemic of fentanyl death in their, but shockingly it goes to they're trying to pull down that they can rise up. This is not an accident. And if someone has evidence otherwise, I'd welcome that conversation, but the damage is clear, the evidence trail is pretty clear. And just last on this, there are too many families who have lost loved ones, but I would also emphasize there are millions and millions of American households that live with this because the addiction that comes with this is so potent and so destructive. And so many of us have had family members who have watched people die in their presence, and they still go back to use. Think of that. What level of deterrence it takes in our society to try to keep people from using if that happens. We have children who will never be fully functioning adults because this permanently changes people's brains. It just takes away retirement. It takes away vacations. It takes away normal Christmases. Everything in their lives changes. So in our families, in our communities, in our churches, in our states, we have a tremendous demand to try to meet this and overcome it that goes beyond just the risk of death, which is horrible enough. It's living with this that can be also extremely damaging. And I go back to Beijing. They know. They provide TikTok to mesmerize and take away productivity. They launched COVID into the world. And they got us to be willing to destroy our economy and our civil liberties. They didn't have to do it. And this fentanyl epidemic, I believe, is just another arrow in the quiver of being able to divide and drag down America and take away a generation of productivity from us so that they can, I think, somewhat selfishly try to rise up where they would never otherwise catch us. So.
Thanks, Steve. And I think you'll be holding your breath for too long if you have to wait for that evidence to suggest to the contrary. No, this is clearly not a healthy competitor, whether economic or otherwise, so that mischaracterization by the current administration really does a disservice to the American people on a lot of different fronts. Rodney, let me throw a question over to you. It's apparent and obvious by all metrics and just common sense that the CCP is very well aware that China is the source of the precursors, makes its way to the cartels, comes across our southern border. Earlier this year, you may or may not have seen it, this administration put out a policy to combat the supply chains of fentanyl. The word China did not appear, CCP did not appear a single time. So if you didn't see it, you didn't say anything because it just doesn't seem like a serious document. How can any administration policy not even name the enemy and expect it to be an effective policy?
So see it, and it talked a little bit, quite a bit actually, about preventative. It talked about reactive, and I support all of that. It didn't acknowledge the facts, and that's something we keep seeing in this administration over and over again, is picking little bits and pieces and refusing to have an entire conversation about an issue. But the fact is that used to, China just shipped stuff directly into the United States. And we had a very aggressive approach with that, Customs and Border Protection and the U.S. Postal Service, and we really shut that down. And then they started shipping the precursors into Mexico and having these super labs. But it also really didn't talk about Mexico either. So it didn't talk about China, it didn't talk about Mexico, and unfortunately, it was several pages that really didn't talk about anything. Because it also didn't even acknowledge, and they've actually mentioned, this administration likes to talk about where seizures take place, but they refuse to talk about the availability of fentanyl and other narcotics on the streets of America. They want to talk about how at the ports of entry is where the majority of the seizures take place, but they completely avoid talking about the fact that this mass illegal immigration that they've invited to the United States has taken Border Patrol agents and Customs and Border Protection officers off of their enforcement duties, assigned them to administratively processing immigration cases, and that's about an hour per person. That's hundreds of thousands of man hours that should have been dedicated to actually enforcing laws on our border that are not. We need to acknowledge that it's coming from China. We have proven through prior administrations that we have techniques to identify international shipments and hold both the countries shipping it and the countries receiving it accountable. We could put those back in place, and we need to hold Mexico accountable for being this safe haven of narcotics and human trafficking.
So Steve, I think you touched on this in your opening remarks, but there's not an opioid problem in China, despite the precursors just running rampant there. How is it that the CCP is shutting it down internally while allowing it to leave its borders and go to the United States and every other country in the world?
Well, I think it's just the difference between free and open societies versus societies that are controlled from the top down. So you have a leadership that is paranoid, and one of the benefits of being paranoid is they're extremely intrusive in tracking who's doing what with whom, and they have decades of kind of grandma in the corner spying on everyone else, what's going on. Started in the Cultural Revolution, now it's digitized and modernized. And so you really don't have any privacy in China. Of course, they have low-cost healthcare in their way of thinking, and so through that system, they have total control over who's being given what. And I wager to say that what we are dealing with in societies with a younger generation that is plagued with anxiety, which, as the tragic story we heard at our opening, is a key ingredient in this. the fentanyl is not typically taken as a dose just straight into your mouth or your veins. It's put onto something that someone else is taking to try to treat another malady. And so whether it's mental health, anxiety, or whatever, we have a bit of a pandemic of that in our country that is not being replicated across China. We might want to think about what some of those root causes are, but they don't have the freedom to freelance inside their country to kill their youth. If you think of it this way too, they've had 2 generations of a one-child policy. And somewhat comically, they'll refer to the children as little emperors because they have 2 parents and 4 grandparents who have poured all of their hopes and dreams in the future in that one child. And if anything happens to that child, if there's an earthquake and a school crumbles because of poor construction, what have you, even in the Communist Party where they have no soul and no accountability, they're terrified of those villagers for losing their little emperors in those schools. And so the government is pretty vigilant in making sure this is not spreading in their system. But just like COVID, engaging in dangerous behavior, they found that they weren't completely clear of, but they definitely made the decision to shut down travel domestically and let things go out internationally. Same goes with where these experiments on things like fentanyl and dangerous precursors.
Let me follow up on that, unless, Rodney, you had anything to add? No. So we talked about the current administration's supply chain combating fentanyl and the failures there. What, if anything, is this administration's policy to stop the Chinese aggression, whether it be China on fentanyl or everything else that we've talked about?
Well, rhetorically, the administration will say that they've continued some of the past administration's adjustments to what has been a conventional way of dealing with China. The president himself seems to have an active wrestling match with which side of his brain is winning on any given day about which way he's going. I think it was the late, great Senator Helms who would quote Alice in Wonderland at frequent hearings, "If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there." And so on any given day, President Biden seems to fervently believe that China wants to strategically undermine and displace the United States, and he also believes we don't look through the lens of strategic competition. And I feel very happy that he doesn't look through a magical lens at the world. It's an odd way of even thinking and talking. But ultimately, we don't have a presidential leader that is taking this seriously and telling simple truths. Now, how shocked can we be if they couldn't tell simple truth about COVID, and they couldn't for many decades tell simple truths about trade? Why would we expect them to tell simple truths about this? And when you're the Communist Party of China, you step back and you see, well, Americans can't even tell the truth to their own people. How scared would you be that America's going to do anything seriously to punish you? So you have not only this no ethics and no quality control, you can act with impunity, seemingly. And so I think that we should be actually recalibrating our economic relationship with China. That's the one thing that seems to get their attention. When we put the squeeze on their banks, they got serious about North Korea temporarily. When President Trump made a priority of fentanyl, they put the squeeze on temporarily. And if we removed our overdependence on our especially medical but other supply chains from them, it would really get their attention in the way nothing else does. And that would be a way to start. But it begins with telling the truth.
Great. Now, Roddy, we've been talking a lot about China, but the problem doesn't just end there. It comes to the southern border. We've seen a noticeable and alarming uptick of Chinese nationals associated with the CCP and the PLA showing up at the southern border in recent years. Can you talk to the challenges of the Border Patrol having to deal with Chinese nationals in general as inadmissible or illegal aliens trying to enter unlawfully, or those that they are capturing?
Sure, but I want to loop back to how you ended that last statement. To have an adult conversation about this, you actually have to be transparent and tell the truth. So if you only watch mainstream media, we have an asylum humanitarian crisis at our southwest border, and they show pictures of people from the Northern Triangle, maybe Mexico, and they leave out the fact that the Border Patrol is arresting people from about 150 different nations And now people from nations other than Mexico are outpacing those from Mexico, and that includes China, but it also includes a whole host of other nations. The other thing that they leave out conveniently when they're talking about, we vet these people and we do records checks, it's against a blank sheet of paper. There's no global database about criminals or terrorists. It's got when there is information, it came through our intelligence communities, it came through relationships, and as my esteemed colleague from the right has been really trying to highlight, China controls everything to include the information. So we have a wave of what we refer to as a fighting age males from China and many other countries, but specifically China, pouring across our southwest borders in between the ports of entry right now. What is their intent? Where are they from? They've been coached to basically answer a couple of quick questions, and from China it's easier than some others because of the government regime to beat the first step of the asylum process and get released into the U.S. But I think we have another guest.
Yes, please everyone join me in welcoming Chairman Mark Green. Chairman, we're honored to have you here joining us on the panel today.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Let me just get you involved here right away. As Chad mentioned in his bio of you, you are the chairman of the Homeland Security Committee. You also serve on Foreign Services. You've been a vocal critic of both China, the cartels, and the unsecure southern border. What we're trying to do here today is show the entire fentanyl life cycle, how all those pieces are connected. So from your perspective, what's going on?
Well, I mean, there are multiple different motivations going on, and they've aligned. So the Chinese Communist Party wants to unseat America as the global superpower. You can look at it, Sun Tzu, there can only be one tiger on top of the mountain kind of thing. The drug cartels want to make money. And for them, it's a little bit about control in Mexico and some other subsidiaries, sort of, but ultimately for them, it's about money and power that comes from money. And those two forces have aligned, and so the precursors are manufactured in China. They're sent to, so far they've been sent to Mexico, where they get pressed into pill form and other mechanisms. Now it's in vaping devices. And it's brought across our open southern border, and it's killing Americans. And I understand you had some very heartrending testimony earlier. Every one of these mothers and fathers and family members that I talked to, it just rips your heart out. We just had two in my hometown. But it is very much two different sets of motivations that are aligning. In regard to China, it's the most observed, surveilled state on the planet, and they can't identify the 160,000 companies that are manufacturing the precursors and shipping them. So we know this is a concerted effort on the Chinese, and if you think about it from a historical standpoint, what happened to them at the end of the Qing dynasty with the Boxer Rebellion and the Opium Wars and all of that stuff from England and selling the opium to China, they have a historical personal experience with this and how it destabilized their society. So their intentions are very clear, and we can see it happening in our country every day. They are being effective. It's working. So that, among many, many other mechanisms that they're using, the Belt and Road Initiative, their China 2025 plan, have a very methodical strategic plan to displace the United States. And some would argue in some areas, whether it's diplomatic, informational, military, or economic warfare, they're winning. So it's time for us to wake up.
Well, thank you. Let me follow up with you on that. It's obvious that the CCP is complicit in the current fentanyl crisis here in the United States. From your perspective, is China using fentanyl to destroy American society?
Absolutely, yes. It's just like the disinformation campaigns that come from both Russia and from China. All of that has the intention of harming the United States from within. they're not stupid. They understand that our military forces recruit from certain age groups, and if they harm people in those certain age groups or get them to have criminal charges, you can't get into an all-volunteer military. So all of those things are strategies. What's really been upsetting to me recently is just the number of Chinese nationals coming across the open southern border. We're now at like over 12,000 this fiscal year, and if you look at the 3 years prior to that, the statistical significance, or the statistical difference between those 3 years is almost zero, and then suddenly you get this massive spike in Chinese nationals. There's not something that happened in China in the last 6-8 months that would compel that much of a migration shift, right? Asylum seekers. And we've had a sector chief tell me that very specifically, many of the people that are being released into the United States have ties to the PLA. So this is a concerted effort by the Chinese to destabilize the United States, to harm our society, and to facilitate their basic execution of their version of the global world order.
That's great, and we were starting to touch on that with Rodney right before he joined us. So Rodney, just back to you. I think you were talking about the gotaways and the problem with that, comparing that to the way the media paints everybody as a sympathetic asylum seeker, in particular, discounting the military-age men from, places farther away than the Northern Triangle.
So the gotaways it can be made very, very complicated. I'll try to make it very easy for you. You'll hear two different types of gotaways talked about publicly. When the United States Border Patrol, and they try to avoid, when I say Border Patrol, CBP and DHS try to prevent Border Patrol currently from talking about gotaways and reporting those numbers publicly. So the only way you'll find them is on individual sector chiefs' tweets or in court documents where they've had to be responsive in court cases. When you see those numbers, though, those are known. Those are not estimates. The United States Border Patrol, over my career, put processes in place where we systematically patrolled sections of border, and basically to call somebody a gotaway and write it down on a sheet of paper, it has to meet specific criteria. There has to be evidence behind it, something this administration doesn't like very well. So when they report that 1.5 million gotaways, those are known. So a couple things you need to think about right there. It's all different nationalities, but a couple things play in. One, they didn't want to get caught because if they wanted to claim asylum, as this administration talks about all the time, they could have just waited in line, waited for the next bus to show up and taken them in for processing. They didn't do that. The other thing we know is they didn't stay at the border, so wherever you live is where they went. They went all over this entire country, and again, it's over 150 different nationalities. These are not people from Mexico that are coming to do manual labor you don't want to do that this administration would like to talk about. But there's a whole nother caveat out there that they refuse to talk about. The mass migration today, along with shutting down the border wall construction, which also shut off the technology package that was going in with that, basically reduced the eyes and ears of the United States Border Patrol tremendously. So there are hundreds of miles of border. There's no technology. There's no surveillance equipment out there whatsoever unless an agent takes it. And then now those agents are processing all these asylum claims, so they're no longer patrolling those sections of border. So there's a sarcastic comment in the Border Patrol that says, hey, an alien unseen is an alien uncounted. That also means a drug smuggler unseen is a drug smuggler uncounted. That's, that's the massive amount of fentanyl that's available on the streets in the United States today, because this is what the cartel does every day. Matter of fact, probably right now. They'll use people that are willing to surrender. They want to claim asylum, and sometimes that's fighting males from China, fighting age males, and they will look north, figure out how many Border Patrol agents are around, and they'll push a group across to overwhelm whatever law enforcement is in that area. And they get to pick how big of an area that is. Are you talking hundreds of miles, or are you talking 5 or 10 miles? And as soon as law enforcement is overwhelmed with responding to illegal aliens, the second wave, whether it be people that paid more to get in because we may have a record or they think we might have a record of them, or it's a pickup truck or a boat or a backpack full of you fill in the blank, that's what goes through the second wave undetected. We have no idea the unknowns there. So that 1.5 million, those are known. But the fact that there's no shortage of illegal aliens or fentanyl on our streets of our cities in the United States of America is a direct result of open borders.
Yeah, Chief Ortiz, under testimony to the Committee on Homeland Security, if I could jump in here, talked about this number that goes around. Rodney did a great job of saying the gotaways are counted. They're actually, I see 8 people bypassing me while I'm dealing with 20, and those get recorded as gotaways. But Chief Ortiz said it's probably another 20% that just come across the border, and I would submit it's probably far greater than 20%. I don't know, Rodney, if you have an opinion on that, but it is. Those are the people that are wearing the carpet shoes and the camouflage outfits and the backpacks that never get recorded. So the numbers are astronomical.
Chairman, last time you were with us, it was at our National Security Symposium. You were on a panel where the theme was Homeland Security is national security. Do you believe that the current administration looks at it in that fashion?
No, I think that they think the border is there to empower the Democrat Party into perpetuity. So I can't think of another reason why you would be willing to accept 100,000 dead Americans every year, cartel crime being facilitated all across the country, just for your good heart to help people in need. I mean, it's all about their power. And you look at everything they do, whether it's want to stack the Supreme Court, H.R. 1, their bill last cycle to change the election systems, D.C. statehood, everything the Democrats do is about guaranteeing their power into the future forever. And that's what the open southern border is all about.
And Steve, you touched on this a little bit earlier. What were some of the more effective policies of getting tough on China from the previous administration that we've gone a complete 180 in just a couple of years?
Well, as I said, there's no substitute for a president telling the truth and making it a priority, and so we await that day. There was a beginning of a realistic adjustment in American trade and manufacturing that I think is a precondition for us having the wherewithal to really undo what I think has been an unfortunate experiment. 30 years ago, China was not the export platform of the world. We had not concentrated all of these supply chains into China. And back when Henry Kissinger was opening China to the world, no one would have imagined in the middle of the Great Cultural Revolution, where millions of Chinese people were killed, and if you wanted to see the origins of the woke movement and cancel culture, you can look back at where this sprang up during that time. No one would have imagined that this dirt-poor, self-destroyed country would one day become the manufacturing platform for the planet, and the greatest nation known to mankind would be overly dependent upon it. We did that. They didn't. There was no Chinese policy that poured trillions of dollars into their economy and gave them privileged access to our education system, to our immigration system, to our economy. We did that, and we're going to pay heavily in order to stay away from it, but we, our friends and allies, have no choice. Our good friend and colleague, Bob Lighthizer, has a new book. I encourage everyone to go get it and read it. But in it is a core thesis about strategic decoupling. We're not going to have an on-off switch with American trade with China, but we should, I think, get every American to agree that we cannot and should not have a 90% dependency upon China for pharmaceutical goods, especially if we know that they don't have quality control, they lie, and they are poisoning Americans. Why would we allow this to continue? And I hope that the grassroots of America would rise up and put just a little bit of fire under the feet of people that say, oh, we can just continue to have this pharmaceutical supply chain. Because the death toll from fentanyl is awful. As is mentioned in the materials prepared, we're losing more Americans per year than we did the entire Vietnam War, and that was a national upheaval in our politics and our society, but somehow we're sleeping through this so far. So we need an awakening, and I think the last administration began that on trade, but now, post-COVID and with greater awareness about fentanyl, I think people hopefully will see this more clearly. And I think in general, We need to begin to be serious about supporting our friends and allies to have greater independent capability to deal with these things themselves. It will not be too far off before there's a similar problem happening in Japan, in Taiwan, in India, in other places, because it's hitting America first because we are first. So I think that the beginnings of how to make this adjustment started in the Trump administration, and if the election had gone the way it was supposed to go, we'd be in the second term of further developing that adjustment. The Biden administration pays lip service to it, but sadly, I'd say more than halfway through, the Chinese don't feel very much pressure on this, and until we put some real skin in the game, they have no rational reason to change because they don't care about our children.
If I could chime in, there's a saying in Mexico, silver or lead. So it really refers to the cartels, but their control in Mexico. And the Trump administration understood that literally you have all these other powers, whether it be the financial, whether it be your own population. And even in our own relationships, the only way you get somebody else to do something for you is if you make it beneficial to them or painful. And I'm so oversimplified, but that's the only way you do it. So the Trump administration understood that, but it all started with acknowledging the problem. We acknowledged that it was coming from China. We acknowledged that Mexico was complicit. And then the Trump administration made it very clear to them that we would either take away money or we would have other sanctions to make it very painful if they continued to kill and participate in killing Americans. This administration refused to even acknowledge China or the Mexican government and the cartel's complicity in this problem, in this quote-unquote national strategy. Transparency really is the issue, but it's going to take all of us kind of pushing that issue, because this administration, part of the reason I'm sitting here today is this administration didn't want to acknowledge that border security is national security, and I was prohibited from saying that as the chief of the Border Patrol. That goes to this issue as well.
Well, I think that's a good time to transition to the focus on the cartels, that second evil actor in the fentanyl poisoning crisis that we're dealing with. So to Chairman Green, I have a question for you. Earlier this year, President AMLO of Mexico said, oh, there's no drugs in Mexico. They don't have a drug problem. Fentanyl is not made there. That's a preposterous claim. Sort of what does that show about the way AMLO views the current United States administration? And from your perspective, does it seem like AMLO has been corrupted by the cartels, or are they holding some sort of influence over him?
So I don't have classified information that I can share about how there's some deal between the cartels and AMLO. But I do know that the people in Mexico believe that there's some compromise there. Okay, so if you go and talk to Mexican business people, they'll tell you, oh yeah, there's compromise. In terms of AMLO himself, though, I mean, he is a unique leader for Mexico, probably much more along the lines of the current guy Luna in Brazil. He's more socialist, somewhat authoritarian. He attempted to rewrite the Constitution of Mexico in order to empower himself. So we've seen that before, right, from the hard left. I don't anticipate that we're going to get anywhere with AMLO. AMLO is operating on his own, again, to empower himself. As far as how he regards this administration, I mean, the whole world sees this as a weak joke. I mean, Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine, or made the decision to invade Ukraine on the day we pulled out of Afghanistan. And there's no one who can convince me otherwise. It's just weakness is like slapping your enemy in the face. It is provocation. And we have the weakest administration, probably the most corrupt administration in the history of our country.
Well, and Rodney, while we're glad to have you here, the country would have been better off if you were still manning the lines. You're starting to talk about this earlier. Can you talk about the difficulty in detecting fentanyl from the illegal aliens that are coming across the border for the few Border Patrol agents who are actually on the lines instead of far away from the border on the processing centers?
Sure, and I'll talk about it from a CBP standpoint and Border Patrol specifically. So just think of the fact that 2 grams can kill somebody, just that small amount. How easy is that to hide? So this administration, once again, talks all the time about how most of the seizures are at the ports of entry. And you can go on to cbp.gov, by the way, and dig into their stats, and you'll see that that is the case because it's the front door of our home. And we have technology and CBP officers, or we did, and I'll touch on that in a minute, until recently, actually waiting to greet every single person. And we have x-ray machines, you have drug sniffing dogs, you even have some technology that can detect certain chemicals and detect fentanyl. So we have a higher level of confidence that when something comes through there, that we can detect it and find it. However, let's go back, 2 grams. This stuff is hidden in everything, and now the vapes, it can be liquefied, it can be powder, it can look like a legitimate pharmaceutical pill. So the ports they're processing millions and millions of people every day. And you guys are probably think about the border right now, meaning the physical land border. When you fly into Dallas, that is an international airport. There are 328 front doors around this country where our CBP officers are supposed to be inspecting people and enforcing the laws. But this administration, through their policy decisions, have shoved hundreds of thousands of more illegal aliens, undocumented foreigners, into those ports of entry for processing. It takes about an hour per person. So just this last month, in May, they reported over 100,000 man-hours were taken away from enforcement at our ports of entry. The cartels love that. They're already pushing dope through on purpose to get caught, to distract agents at ports of entry, and then they're pushing a bigger load through. Well, between the ports of entry, it's even worse. There's no technology, really. We have some dogs, but primarily the Border Patrol dogs are used at Border Patrol checkpoints. When they are processed at a Border Patrol station, there's no systematic canine alert or canine search of any of their backpacks or any of their goods, and those are just the people you take into custody. Even with all of that, the Border Patrol still seized enough fentanyl last month to kill over 300,000 U.S. citizens crossing in between our ports of entry. But I touched earlier, beyond actually seeing the individual, we are leaving hundreds of miles of border unpatrolled every single day, and we are documenting over 1.5 million gotaways. But there are sections of the border where we see a boat coming across, we see people getting out with backpacks. There are parts of the border now where the border wall technology wasn't completed, so they've cut the new border wall, and truckloads of who knows what is coming across that border. Having a secure border should not be political. It should just, it didn't used to be over my career. Literally wanting people to come through our front door, making a conscious decision of who and what gets into our country is common sense. But this administration has thrown common sense out the window, as we've discussed here. We have to have people coming through the port of entry in a systematic way to have any hope of stopping this flow.
Thank you. And for our local audience, Dulles International Airport is also a port of entry. Chairman, the cartels have gotten very sophisticated in their recruitment and promotion of fentanyl. It's not just, the manual, physical going over the border. They are using social media platforms. They are using the fintech platforms. Is Congress exploring how to put some barriers in place there, hold the social media and fintech companies accountable for allowing their platforms to be exploited?
So let me also add to this that we now have information that the actual pill manufacturing is being brought into the United States, so that the precursors are coming into the U.S. and the cartels are actually making them in the U.S. So that's something that we haven't talked about, and that's all being orchestrated by China and the cartels in a collaboration between those. In terms of what Congress can do, we're looking at the foreign terrorist organization designation is just too broad from a legal standpoint to apply to the cartels. I had a bill to do that. In that process, guys like Ken Cuccinelli came to me and explained, and I know everybody in the room probably knows who Ken Cuccinelli is. So Ken came and laid out exactly how that won't work in Mexico, but then said we have to create a new type of legal entity that could authorize the use of military force, et cetera, to go against the cartels. In terms of the fintech companies that are supporting the blockchain that they're using. Look, it's very interesting to me that 30 countries across the world have already implemented or almost implemented a central bank digital currency. And Mexico was about to do it and then decided suddenly to put it on hold. Now, I wonder who picked up the phone and called the government and said, hey, by the way, you're not going to do a central bank digital currency in Mexico because why? We can't launder our money. So those organizations can be gotten to once we create this designation that allows us to go after, you know, sanctioning businesses specifically that facilitate the laundering of money. But there's a whole select committee that's been set up to do this.
That's great. And Rodney, just sort of playing off of that with this alarming shift of the production being brought into the United States, what can CBP do as far as screening various types of machinery or other sorts of products that would go into the process of building the equipment to make the drugs?
So they can do a ton, they can do a lot, but it all comes down to prioritization. So CBP has an amazing amount of information about everything that crosses the border legally into the United States or comes through a port of entry. And it's not to say somebody's not hiding something in there, but again, you only have so many officers available to either do the targeting through the systems or the physical inspections of this stuff. You have to prioritize your resources. Right now, what this administration has prioritized very, very openly, and they campaigned on it, so none of us should be surprised, they prioritized processing people into the United States that have no legal immigration right to be here whatsoever. Millions of them. That's taken away the CBP officers from the National Targeting Center. It's taken them away from the inspection. So even though we have access to that information, I guarantee right now it's kind of like the internet, if you will. There's so much information available, but so few people to sift through it that really we're missing tons of it. But CBP has the capabilities, they have the expertise to target pretty much anything you want that crosses that border and take action on it. But it takes laws from Congress to do it, and we have most of that in place, contrary to what this administration says. You know, the last administration, the laws were the same, and we were very, very effective in getting better every single day at being able to filter stuff out. This administration made policy decisions to take those resources away from it and process quote-unquote asylum seekers.
Chairman, do you have anything to add on to that?
No, I mean, I was just going to say that we do have significant numbers of times we've caught the Chinese companies mislabeling stuff on shipping into the U.S. And so that's by the CBP guys. They're the ones doing the research, looking at a suspicious package, looking at a suspicious cargo container and saying, we have to look at that. So the resources, I agree with Rodney, the resources are there. You just have to have the will to do it, and we know that the bad guys are doing it, mislabeling all the time.
Steve?
Well, I think one of the key lessons we learned in the post-9/11 environment was, yes, there was a military and intelligence part that was looking at trying to change things in the world and trying to figure out who people were that were coming in trying to attack us. But the other area that really expanded was in the financial realm. And I think as we look at this intersection between money laundering and the smuggling, that there needs to be a priority placed on the financial tools and probably human intelligence tools to go after the money laundering that actually is the lifeblood that is making this ecosystem churn. And only if we can pinch on those finances will, I think, the cartels and others have to start to adjust in some ways. I think that Chairman Green was exactly right to start looking at what are the authorities and how do they fit into this new kind of environment. But I mean, I think we need new kind of guidelines on the military and intelligence side of it, but also those financial tools, because a lot of the counterterrorism financial measures can and should apply to what we're trying to do. It requires priority and then maybe a little adaptation. And then also cyber capabilities, looking into the apps that these networks are using. And, you know, we have, of course, TikTok coming in and doing what it's doing with Americans. What are Americans doing to be able to penetrate these other apps that are facilitating this kind of money laundering? And so I think from technology and financial tools, intelligence tools, and those authorities being looked at, important ground could be plowed to turn the tide on this.
Yeah, and I'll just want to caveat, when I talked about central bank digital currency, I hope no one construed that I might be supportive of such a thing. I think it's the biggest threat to our privacy in the history of the world, and the Fed is currently hiring people building that, so you should all go check that out. But don't misconstrue that I'm for CBDC. I am completely opposed. The intel and analysis operations at Homeland, one of the things that I've become convinced of, and I don't know if these guys will agree with me, the way it's centralized, I think, makes it less effective. The U.S. military system is to disseminate the intel gatherers and analysis all throughout the ranks of the force. And so we in Congress have tried a couple of times to reinvent how intel and analysis is done in Homeland to mirror something more similar to what's done at DOD. And I have put together, in fact, we just sent some letters out to build this, what I'm calling the R3, to resource, reorganize, and reauthorize the Department of Homeland Security. It hasn't been reauthorized since its inception. And one of the things that we're very, very closely looking at is how intel, because that's kind of where the question is going, the intelligence apparatus and analysis and dissemination happens at DHS, and I think the current model is not effective as it could be.
That's great. And here at AFPI, we don't like to just identify problems. We also like to offer up solutions. And so before we turn it over to the crowd for a few questions, let's start with Steve and China. Whether it was a policy that was in place in a previous administration or an idea that you've come up with that you think, what's the answer to stopping China, particularly with respect to the way they're allowing the fentanyl precursors to come to the United States?
I just sum it up quickly, and people are probably going to get tired of hearing it, but they say in advertising it's only after people are so sick of hearing you say it that it's finally gotten through. But you got to tell the truth. It has to be a priority. We have to strategically decouple important supply chains. That has to be taken extremely seriously. Core principles of common sense like reciprocity need to inform how we're dealing with a government like China. Things that we are not able to do there, they should not be able to do here. And so some kind of rebalancing and recalibrating of our policy, I think, from the grassroots up. Everything from who has the right to buy land. No one. If they're not from America, that's a privilege, and it's a privilege they can engage in, but within certain guidelines and common sense. We need to train and equip and empower American people to feel like they can talk about this and deal with this without getting slapped with accusations of you're just targeting certain kinds of people. The Communist Party of China is not an ethnicity. It's the enemy of the Chinese people as much as an enemy of our way of life. And so I think with AFPI, we're trying to go out to the country to help people feel comfortable that they know what's right and that they're moving their leaders in the right direction. We want to help them from the grassroots up be able to build this new foundation. But it begins with truth, prioritization, and then the strategic decoupling and many, many other fun things from there.
Great. And Chairman Green, I'm going to give you the last word. If the White House were to take your call, what's the one piece of advice that you would give them to secure the border and defeat the cartels?
Resign. I want to, if I could, say a little bit about that last question. What can we do? What are the solutions? We have to tackle the eaches. And what do I mean by that? For example, on the decoupling, I have a nearshoring bill that brings manufacturing that wouldn't work in the United States because of the cost of labor to Latin America. Creates opportunity in Latin America, perhaps decreases pressure on our southern border. The cameras on the cranes at all of our ports are made in China and can download. So when our military deploys to defend Taiwan, they're going to know, right? So we have a bill that says, you know, we have to fix this. So we have to attack the eaches, and there are so many of them. You know, purchasing land. I mean, the states have the authority to say you can't buy farmland or you can't buy. The federal government has less control over that constitutionally, and I'm a federalist, so I don't want the federal government telling the states how to do their business, but we certainly should be able to do it around military installations that are federal pieces of property. But we have to just attack all the eaches.
Great, thank you. I think we have time for 2 questions. We have one of our mic runners, this gentleman right here.
Thank you. Fascinating panel. With respect to the shipment of the precursors of these chemicals that are coming from China, that would seem to be a great project for our intelligence community to take on. Yet from the facts that you're explaining, it seems like maybe there's an absence of action there. Is it because of the nature of the precursors? Is it a policy issue? What are the dot points on why it seems like this achievement that they could be making doesn't seem to be occurring?
I can touch on a little bit about that. Some of it is the intelligence that you're thinking of traditionally, and I say some of that is there, but a lot of it is policy as well. In prior administrations, directly on a non-military, from a law enforcement perspective, we went to other nations and built information sharing with them, that we help and teach them how to identify and target things that were mislabeled and or actual chemicals that were dual purpose. And sometimes we had to use some a little bit of leverage, threaten tariffs, if you will, to get that information, to get them to act. But that's the policy piece that's missing today, because we can get all the information that you want, but without the policy in place for us to go to another foreign nation and get them to take action on those precursors coming in, it's useless information.
Yeah, the thing to note about fentanyl is that small dose means it's also small packages. And the volume of stuff that China ships both to the United States and Mexico is astronomical. I mean, 75% of the things that the United States consumes comes from outside the United States. So those ports, you think of the huge cargo ship with hundreds of, of those cargo containers, and a small box, less than the top of that podium, can contain all the precursors to make enough to kill hundreds of thousands of Americans. So it's like looking for a needle in the haystack and getting the intel on where it's at in China, which is a closed society that we don't have a lot of. I mean, it's hard to penetrate. So from an intel standpoint, it's not an easy job if we were trying really hard, and we're not trying really hard.
Great, thank you. Just last question in the back.
Hey, gentlemen, Gregory T. Angelo. I worked in the previous administration in the White House Office of National Drug Control Policy, so I got to see a lot of these problems up close. I know what the challenges are, and I first want to thank you for your work rising to those challenges to overcome those. There's been a lot of talk in recent years rhetorically equating illicit fentanyl to a weapon of mass destruction. We saw the guest in the previous panel who sadly lost her child to fentanyl poisoning call it a weapon of mass destruction. We had the President's Commission on Opioids say that illicit fentanyl is a slow motion weapon of mass destruction in pill form. But increasingly we're seeing advocacy for policy change to have illicit fentanyl formally declared a weapon of mass destruction. You have a national nonprofit, Families Against Fentanyl, that is advocating for that. You have the Florida Attorney General that led a bipartisan letter to the Biden administration asking that illicit fentanyl be called a weapon of mass destruction. And there's 3 pieces of legislation right now in Congress. There's a resolution from Congressman Neil Dunn. There's a bill from Congressman Wenstrup, and there's another bill from Congressman Boebert that would have DHS declare illicit fentanyl a weapon of mass destruction. I would like to know what your thoughts are on making this policy move, if you think it has any possibility to actually coming to fruition, if you think a future Republican administration would actually implement this, and if you think there's even a potential for this to happen in a Democratic administration.
Well, first let me give you my opinion. I mean, it's a weapon of mass destruction. And the problem is, is this rhetoric, or is this a legal definition that you're going to enforce and then say China's committed an act of war, right? So that's the point that you have to be very careful moving down that path. Now, I would submit to you that if you use the dime paradigm, we've been at war economically and informationally and diplomatically with China for a long time, and we just kind of woke up, some of us here in the past few years. But right now, obviously, you're hearing a lot about it. Some of that's messaging, and then some of it is taking a serious look at whether or not there are legal ramifications and then we have to be prepared for the American people have to be prepared for what that means when you make it a legal designation of a weapon of mass destruction, right? It's just like cyber. Cyber's another one of those areas where we're just not owning what's really going on. And, the state organizations that are committing cyber espionage, IP theft through cyber, what the Chinese did, that Chinese company did in Guam just recently, I mean, when are we going to say, okay, enough is enough, and these are acts of war? And but the American people have got to be ready for what that means, the consequences of what that means. So I think what you see amongst the political folks is the will of the American people there? Because once you flip that switch,
well, I think we are definitely stuck in this dilemma about whether it's a legal or technical or just an English language definition of a weapon of mass destruction. And I think for average, everyday Americans, obviously this is a weapon and it has created mass destruction. I would argue it's contributed to more destruction than people see or feel or have any measure for. We probably don't have an accurate count of fatalities. It's probably, we probably know a smaller number than the real number of fatalities, and we don't even have people trying or with the capability to count the number of other lives affected by this. The brothers and sisters who grow up watching someone that they knew, that was their loved one, their big brother, their big sister, have their complete lives changed, turn into a completely different human being, and possibly be taken from this earth too soon. The mothers and fathers whose marriages break apart and have ripple effects from all of this. It's an equal opportunity destroyer. I think it fits under any reasonable definition of a weapon of mass destruction, but it does come back immediately to what the chairman was saying. What are we really prepared to do about it? And if we believe in federalism and that we represent the people, we need the people to know and to say what they're prepared to do about that. And I think that's part of this information campaign, to raise awareness and stir this conversation. And hopefully it leads to some real progress in the direction you're alluding to.
I'll just close real quickly following up on that I think that the key issue here is transparency and actually having an adult conversation, but taking it to the second and third level of effects. Because that's the challenge I had as the chief in this administration, is they would touch on one little issue or they would talk about one little fact and they would leave out all the second, third level effects. They would leave out everything it took to actually have an adult conversation so that when you walked into a ballot box, you were making an informed decision. So kind of on the side, on many issues, I'm pushing for legislative requirements that federal agencies have to be more transparent about what they're seeing, what they're doing, whether it's the illegal immigration piece, whether it's the how many miles of border that are being left open each and every single day. Because I think this panel, what we're really trying to do is exactly what you said, is share information, raise awareness, but get Americans to ask more questions and make sure that we hold our government accountable so we don't become like China, where the government gets to decide what information we do and don't have. As Americans, we need that information to make conscious decisions about, hey, am I willing to pay $20 more for an item because it's not made in China? Many of us that have looked into the real threats are willing to do that, but the average American doesn't even understand that right now and those impacts. So I think it really comes down to transparency.
Great, and with that, just want to say that the current fentanyl poisoning crisis, it's traumatizing our country, but it does not have to continue this way. I think we've identified a lot of positive solutions to solve it in the America First action plan to combat fentanyl. And with that, please join me in thanking the panelists.
Ladies and gentlemen, we will take a short break. When we come, don't go far. When we come back, lawlessness in our communities, public health, and the opioid crisis with Senator Roger Marshall, Kellyanne Conway, and former acting U.S. Attorney General Matt Whitaker.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way to your seats. The program will be getting started in a few minutes. Again, please make your way to your seats. The program will begin shortly. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, if you could, please begin to find your seats. The program will begin in about 5 minutes. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please find your seats, the program will begin momentarily. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the Chief Policy Officer at the America First Policy Institute and the Director of the Center for a Healthy America, Dr. Heidi Overton, MD, PhD.
Thank you all for joining us and for the second panel of the Combating Fentanyl event here at the America First Policy Institute. On this panel, we're going to be focusing on how fentanyl has contributed to lawlessness in our communities and the overall public health and opioid crisis. I'm honored to have these esteemed guests on the stage with me today. So we will start with Senator Roger Marshall of Kansas. Senator Marshall is a physician who practiced OBGYN in Great Bend, Kansas for more than 25 years and served in the Army Reserves for 7 years. In addition to being a proud member of the GOP Doctors Caucus, Senator Marshall serves on the Committee on Agriculture, Nutrition, and Forestry, the Committee on Health, Education, Labor, and Pensions, the Committee on Homeland Security and Governmental Affairs, and the Committee on Budget. He has sponsored two crucial bills in the fentanyl crisis, the Halt Fentanyl Act and the Cooper-Davis Act, which we're going to talk more about today. Next is Kellyanne Conway. Kellyanne served as senior counselor to President Trump in the Trump administration and worked on a number of issues affecting domestic and global policy. In the administration, she helped lead the work fighting the nation's drug crisis as a member of the President's Commission on Combating Drug Addiction and the Opioid Crisis and led much of that work. Currently, she's the chair for the Center for the America here at AFPI, and she leads us in advancing priorities to promote children's well-being, social safety online, and a number of others. We'll have Attorney General Whitaker. He served as the acting Attorney General for the U.S. during the Trump administration from 2018 to 2019. Previously, he served as a U.S. Attorney for the Southern District of Iowa and was a managing partner of a law firm in Des Moines, Iowa. Currently, Attorney General Whitaker is the co-chair for the Center for Law and Justice at AFPI alongside Pam Bondi. And they together help us advance policies to support the American people's right to live and prosper in free and secure communities. Finally, and very especially, we have Mary Beth Crichton. She's a mom who tragically lost 31-year-old son Zach to an accidental fentanyl poisoning last December, and she's here for solutions to end this public health emergency. Please help me welcome all of our guests. Into a few distinct segments, and first I want to start with just understanding this aspect of the fentanyl, how it relates to the opioid crisis that we've been in for a little while. We're going to talk about understanding the current problem, fentanyl poisoning affecting our community, and then finally a good amount of time on solutions. Senator Marshall, would like to start with you. Your background as a physician, what are your general observations on how the crisis has changed over the years?
Well, Heidi, thank you, and thanks everybody at AFPI for hosting this and giving us a platform to talk about the leading killer of young adults in the nation, losing 300 young adults every day in a plane crash of young Americans every. So certainly I've seen the opioid crisis go from nothing to something in my medical career. We used to send people home with 30, 40, 50 Percocet tablets from getting your teeth pulled. And we went back, did some education. I think that doctors and nurses got the message out and clear. And I think that our profession is doing a much better job with it. But I think probably the biggest difference I see today than before is just how easy access it is. It's easier to get a fentanyl tablet and cheaper than it is to get pizza to go. You can sit on Snapchat and order these tablets for fentanyl tablets for maybe $1 or $2 a piece now in Kansas. So our profession, we still got work to do. We're in a better spot. There's other alternatives out there for pain control as well, but just the access to narcotics is just so easy, and just the different things they're doing with the narcotics. I mean, they're now lacing marijuana with it, let alone the Adderalls, all those different things that we see are so easily reproduced.
Absolutely, Senator. Thank you. So Kellyanne, previously serving in the Trump administration, and we got to work together on a number of issues there. You worked so diligently alongside the President and the First Lady on this issue, raising the profile of educating Americans, specifically on the opioid crisis and on fentanyl. So describe a little bit of that work and this phase that we're in talking about fentanyl now.
Thank you, Heidi. Hello to my co-panelists, and thank you very much, AFPI, for again and again raising awareness and action on this incredibly important issue, really affecting every nook and cranny of the country. It is the most indiscriminate epidemic we face right now. It knows no race, no gender, no socioeconomic status, no geographic bound, no political identification. And I think that is why in October of 2018, Heidi, you had every single Democrat in the United States Congress and Senate vote in favor of the SUPPORT Act. SUPPORT was an acronym, and it weaved together bills. Sometimes, often, Capitol Hill, if you start adding bills to other bills, you actually gain support, thing in there for everyone. But every single Democrat voted in favor of the act which President Trump signed into law, the single biggest investment in our nation's history in the drug crisis, $6 billion. And what we tried to do, what it did do, the $6 billion, was to tackle the three major components of our opioid fentanyl polydrug crisis. Number one, prevention and education, trying to decrease demand and increase awareness. Prescribers, to former doctor and current senators, that many of our prescribers said they got a little education in medical school about how to safely prescribe. And it was just automatic, able to write a script for those 30 or 40 pills. Then, of course, it was treatment and recovery, law enforcement interdiction. And again, by the fall of 2018, what the President and First Lady had done was really remarkable, because the very next year, this country had the first decline in overdose deaths in 30 years. 70,000, we're now about double that as of last year's figures. So it's a man-made crisis, certainly, and it can be, I think, ameliorated with the right kind of leadership. The other things that the Trump administration were able to do was we had the Surgeon General for the first time in 10 years make a public advisory about the great effect of overdose reversing drugs, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But I think beyond even the $6 billion, it was raising the awareness, which also raised action on things like fentanyl coming legally through our mails, and stopping that through our mails, through our ports, obviously through the southern border. But it was also trying to increase awareness among young people. And First Lady Melania Trump had this as part of her Be Best platform and continues to this moment. Why that's important is she took on an issue called NAS babies, NAS, neonatal abstinence syndrome babies. Right now, as we sit here, we have about 59, close to 60, so what's that, 9,000 or so a year, quick math, babies born every single day already chemically dependent. And the First Lady took on that issue, and we traveled around the country, and she raised dollars for it, and awareness and action. The upshot of that was to make sure that we keep the mother and the baby together. It's better for the baby or for the mother. So many different ways. Findrecovery.gov that had been sitting there, we renamed it and redid it in a way that you can customize finding treatment for yourself, findtreatment.gov rather. We had a public service campaign with the Ad Council. It was seen, our ads were seen by 1.5 billion people worldwide. The longer version of the ad won an Emmy. All these things that you'll never hear because that's light and not heat, so it wasn't covered. But the good news is we can get back to those conversations, back to those policies with the right kind of leadership. I think in addition to the opioid and fentanyl epidemic we have an epidemic right now in this city and across this country, an epidemic looking the other way. And if we just stare at the issue straight on, we can resurrect these solutions. And I'm very happy to hear President Trump and others talking about the work that was done and confronting this crisis head on. Thank you.
Thank you, Kellyanne. General Whitaker, you were at the DOJ during this time and law enforcement actions that we took from that side. So can you describe some of those actions in the previous administration to address the opioid crisis, especially synthetic opioids?
Yeah, well, it's great to be such a distinguished panel, and it's my pleasure to join you, my co-chair Pam, because many of the we did were in response to seeing this drug overdose deaths increasing. Before we came in the winter of 2017, and so we knew that the dark web was a problem, that you could order and have them delivered through the U.S. Postal Service to your home, and so we targeted and shut down, which was a big dark web site that you could get anything from fentanyl drugs to a rocket launcher, kind of crazy, arms and other illegal things. So that went down, and we visited Tampa and the U.S. Attorney's Office in Tampa, and we met with Pam, and we heard about a really innovative project that the Central District of Florida was working on in Manatee County, where they essentially would take any fentanyl case that the local police would give them. They would drop the prosecution standards. We thought that was a really good idea, and so we put that out across the U.S. Attorney's offices for any fentanyl trafficking or drug transactions. We lowered the prosecution standards to take those cases to essentially just a small amount, because as many of you know, about 5 grains of sand worth of fentanyl is a lethal overdose quantity. So you can imagine how much would be in a packet of sugar, or a kilogram, for example, what they're getting down the southern border now. It's quite shocking. But we knew and we saw the continued challenges, and so we didn't stop at that project, which we called SOS at the time. We then saw where there were hot spots, especially in Appalachia and other places that were having challenges, and the deaths were increasing. And so we surged resources. We pushed out more assistant U.S. attorneys to focus on synthetic opioids. And in addition to all of that, as chief of staff, I went to China as part of a delegation where I was the lead of that delegation to meet with the Chinese to deliver the message from President Trump that they needed to not only schedule fentanyl themselves, but they needed to start cracking down on their industry, because as it was mentioned in one of the previous panels, they know what's going on. They knew they were profiting. In fact, I still continue to believe that China is doing this intentionally to disrupt the States of America. This is an intentional act of the Chinese. Now, a lot of the manufacturing of fentanyl has moved to Mexico in the labs that are very expert at manufacturing methamphetamine, something I'm very familiar with because we had massive profit with meth and still do in Iowa, my home state. But by getting the Chinese to agree to schedule, that did help some, but the precursor chemicals are still manufactured in China, and they need to do more than they appear to be willing to. But at the same time, we were able to make some progress through those efforts. In addition to all of that, we looked for other ideas anything that we could do at the Department of Justice, including having DEA, since actually fentanyl is not Schedule I substance, illegal drug, we emergency fentanyl. And I don't think Congress has gotten that done yet, but hopefully we won't have to keep at DOJ scheduling fentanyl Schedule I controlled substance, that we can get Congress to schedule that and make that permanent. Those are some of the things administration we were able to accomplish.
Great. Well, that's a great way to set the stage and to understand kind of to today. And so we're going to continue to talk on the public safety component can change and the public health components, the problems and solutions. And so, Mary Beth, we're so honored to have you. This is why we're here, is like Stephanie and you being able to share your story. And so we know that fentanyl has tragically impacted your family. So I just want to give you the floor. Can you share your story with us?
Absolutely. I want to thank you for allowing me to talk about Zach. He died of fentanyl poisoning on December 3rd last year. He was a beautiful soul. I like to talk about because he's one of the faces of fentanyl, and it's a stigma sometimes that's associated with people who have substance use disorders. We know that fentanyl is also affecting people who are experimenting for the first time, and there's candy fentanyl that kids can get a hold of. But, you know, back in Maryland, Zachary loved to skateboard and snowboard, and he had a major snowboarding injury, and ultimately he had to have surgery, but he became addicted to opioids through oxycodone, and it morphed into heroin. And after failed attempts at rehab, he went to Florida. But in Maryland, you know, he was on an upward trajectory with Ford. He was a mechanic. Things were going well until he had this issue with the opioids. And then after multiple failed rehabs, he went to Florida and had 9 months of private rehab. And he was living the Florida life. He was able to get into recovery for almost 4 years. He, you know, got a job doing small aircraft engines. Then he moved on to appliance repairs. And his last job, he was thrilled about with GE. He loved cars and coffee, the Loggerhead Museum, the Bush Wildlife Center. He loved dogs, animals, building Lego cars. He was funny. He was goofy. He was not a partier. He wasn't someone who, you know, wanted to go out and party with people. In fact, he was a little bit of, you know, socially awkward. And I think that the secondary gain that he got after he started, you know, on those prescription medicines was it made him relaxed. And he wasn't as anxious, and I think he had some underlying anxiety, which we tried to address. But, you know, he, you know, had plans. He had plans. He had plans for this year, things he wanted to do with his career, new things he wanted to try in Florida. Loves his family, loves his brothers, and, you know, he didn't plan, you know, to die of fentanyl poisoning. So we're on, you know, our family began to advocate. We had no idea of the pervasiveness of the fentanyl. I had no idea, even having a son who had this, you know, had this history. So it was quite a shock when we found out he died of fentanyl poisoning. We thought he was doing pretty good. He had had a recent slip and gone to in and outpatient rehab. We thought that he was, you know, building up what terminology I have recently heard, recovery capital. When you may just deposit your recovery, you know, going to meetings with a friend. He had gotten a new tattoo that said, "Count your blessings," a lot of positive affirmations in his condo. He was really trying, and so we thought he was doing okay. I don't know if it was emotional distress, physical pain. He had also broke his nose and had surgery on that like a year and a half prior. So he was, you know, always accident prone. But we were very shocked. And Zach's brothers actually deal with this crisis on a daily basis. One of my sons is an emergency room resident up in Pennsylvania, and our other son is a sheriff's deputy in Harford County, Maryland. They have given Narcan. I know we're going to talk about that in a little bit. You know, and see the impact on the families that this crisis is the ripple effect that the crisis is causing. So I do, really appreciate the opportunity to share with you the beautiful life that Zach was living, despite having this history of substance use disorder, and how it started. And I'm one voice, but there's some families out there now. We're putting our voices together. You're all helping raise awareness and coming up with solutions. Biggest threat right now to our country. I'm so happy to be here to share in this event, because we want to make a difference. If I can spare anybody from going through what we're going, it's well worth it. We save one life with what we're doing. It's well worth it.
Mary Beth, thank you for sharing. And it's so important, every part of Zach's story, even how it started. And Senator Marshall and I talked a little bit backstage about both of how we were trained to prescribe opioids after surgery, and addressing that is important, but also recognizing this phase of the crisis, fentanyl epidemic and fentanyl things. Senator Marshall, at a recent town hall in Kansas, the sobering statistic that one dies every day of fentanyl overdose, the tragic story of Cooper Davis from Kansas, who you've been chanting. And so can you tell a little bit of his story and how that story in particular has changed the way that you think about the ongoing crisis?
Right, Heidi. Well, certainly it was a tragic loss of a young man, Cooper Davis. And as we speak right now, the Judiciary Committee is marking up legislation that would honor his life. Cooper was a junior in high school, a small rural high school in Kansas. He was described as a venturesome, nice-looking kid, good grades, really had no notable problems at all. And he and a couple of his friends decided to order 2 Percocet tablets through Snapchat. Cooper took a half a tablet and died. The other friends ended up in the emergency room. A tragic loss. Fentanyl poisoning. And this is poisoning. And I would love to get Matt's comments a little bit later on what do I need to do to empower law enforcement to treat this as poisoning, as some type of a murder, as opposed to, this is not an overdose in no way, shape, or form. So what our legislation would do, it would be for the social media to cooperate, to proactively work with law enforcement when they see this happening. They've got algorithms that they know if I'm looking at a fishing pole, Cabela's is sending me an advertisement for a set of fishing lures as well. They know when it's happening. So, and this is modeled after legislation that Joe Biden wrote when he was regarding social media and child pornography, child trafficking, that type of thing. So we're hoping the Judiciary Committee will get it to the President someday soon.
Thank you, Senator. It's a powerful story and so much of what is. So, Kellyanne, let's dive a little deeper into the new term, fentanyl poisoning. Help us explain how we mean by fentanyl poisoning. Why is it so important for Americans to understand this term?
I'd love to have the word fentanyl just injected more into the everyday lexicon. How is it that it is the #1 killer of 18 to 45-year-olds as we speak? And with the highest increase recently among African Americans and Hispanic populations, and of course young people, anybody who's not raising the issue of fentanyl, making sure you know how to spell it, smell it, see it, perceive it, and know that you can't see it. It's already there. It's embedded in so many of these drugs already. I get the question pretty frequently, Heidi, well, why would a drug pusher, why would a drug kingpin or just your dealer want to kill off his or her population? Well, they want to be known as the ones who will get you to that next high, get you to that next level. And in the case of Cooper Davis, God rest his soul, and so many others like him, and Zach, of course, what they don't know is killing them. You can't suspect this. It's just tiny little grains. So the fentanyl poisoning phrase is very important because we are broadcasting to people that this can hurt you. In fact, it can kill you. But I actually think we need the word fentanyl on its own to be more of the conversation. And the way to do that, I think, is a few different ways. Let me go back to the three components of the drug crisis if it's handled properly. The first is prevention education. So just making sure that kids in the classroom as part of the curriculum, I know many people in this room are fighting against crazy curricula and things being slapped in there and slapped onto our kids that make no sense and really aren't part of reading, writing, arithmetic. This should absolutely be taught. And yes, I'll say at a young age. Why not? Make sure they know. Have it in the public service announcement. Have it as part of the after-school programs. Make sure it is discussed in part of the health classes. And of course you want parents to be involved in that discussion, but I think very few parents would object to their children be exposed to simple facts and figures that are age appropriate and that are factual. The second thing is just making sure that the public writ large has that awareness. Second, and then the next component, the treatment and recovery. This is important because some people do survive the fentanyl poisoning, and we need better ways to communicate to the public that you could end up dead, God forbid, but there are many stages before that. And the fact is that if we can have more overdose reversing drugs available to the public, I think that would help an awful lot of taking the problem out of the dark, take the solution out of the dark. So one thing we tried to do in the Trump administration with success was to make more available naloxone, Narcan, Vivitrol, some of these overdose reversing drugs, make sure we had private companies donating them to school nurses, to public libraries, put them alongside of EpiPens, put them alongside of defibrillators, for example. So I think even that helps to raise the consciousness of the overall problem. And the last part, the interdiction and law enforcement. Some of the best stories for fentanyl seizures in this country were just law enforcement doing their jobs. I remember we invited a state trooper from Nebraska to the Trump White House early on, and we applauded him and raised consciousness of his work. He feels like all he was doing was his job, but he stopped the tractor trailer and had it searched as a state trooper in Nebraska. And there was enough fentanyl in that particular trailer to have killed 26 million Americans. Now we have seizures just in Arizona, just in Texas, just this year and last year, enough to kill every man, woman, and child in this country several times over. So you need to shock the conscience on this issue, but we also need to warm the heart. I said before, it's an epidemic of looking the other way. If law enforcement is just, they're able to be generously resourced and deeply respected to do their jobs, this will flow, this will follow. The other thing that Attorney General Whitaker mentioned is incredibly important is, yes, of course, Chinese fentanyl is still coming here. They're poisoning our country, not just our children, our country. But it's really being developed and manufactured in Mexico now increasingly. We need to know that because we already know that 95% of the heroin comes over the border. We already know that increasingly fentanyl is coming over the border. And so this is or cocaine, excuse me. This is incredibly important because if we have a porous border, if we have 6 million people having come here, I figure that is higher than the population of 31 states. Let that sink in. Then how much of this almost non-detectable illicit substance do you think is coming through? So I can't say it enough. I know my kids have heard it enough for teenagers. So when I show up for work, it's like a spa day. Thanks for having me. But I have drilled into my 4 teenagers and all of their friends to ad nauseum that you can't even see what's hurting you. You trust your friend. You trust your friend to hand you something that's going to keep you awake or help you sleep or make you smarter, prettier, a better athlete, etc. But you have no idea what the chain of custody of that tiny little pill has been. And these young people, I got criticized for saying this in the White House by a bunch of left-wing reporters who worked at an outlet that no longer exists. So let me say it again for everybody's benefit, since we're all still here, that I see these young people. Some of them would never even think of eating a food that had more than 1 or 2 ingredients. They're juicing, they're working out, they're spending hours a day on what goes into their bodies and what they're doing with their bodies. And they won't touch a French fry, but they'll take a pill. They'll order it on Snapchat, they'll take it from a friend, a friendly source. Eat the French fries. Don't eat the pill.
Heidi, let me just amplify a little bit on the poisoning part of it. Two major issues. in America, you're used to consistency. So you get a Percocet with 5 milligram tablets, it's got 5 milligrams of Percocet, or Percocet 7.5, Percocet 10. But one fentanyl tablet is not equal to the other fentanyl tablet. So there's very much an inconsistency. And the reason we don't give this fentanyl in a hospital unless I have anesthesia standing there is I don't know how you're going to react. How Matt would react to it, how Kellyanne would react to this much is going to be very different. And what it does is it makes you stop breathing. It's such a strong narcotic, it makes you stop breathing. So there's inconsistency in the fentanyl out there. And then the other issue is this lacing that's going on, that even lacing marijuana now in Kansas with fentanyl, let alone the Adderall tablets, the Percocet tablets, the antidepressant, all the things that you can get online now. So that's why the poisoning has happened. This is absolutely murder in my estimation.
Yeah, absolutely. So General Whitaker, let's dive a little deeper into that. So the increased potency of fentanyl, right? We've spent a lot of time on that. So what exactly, when we're talking about, could this be murder? Right? What is happening, not just in the poisoning designation, but is law enforcement, do they have the tools they need? If it's so potent now, as we've described and established, how should law enforcement be thinking about this now?
Yeah, that's a great question, and what Kellyanne and the senator have said previously is so important, and I want to amplify some of that and then offer some solutions. But I just want to set the table here that we had serious discussions at the Department of Justice as we were working on the next death penalty protocol to use fentanyl because of what Senator Marshall just described. It's so powerful that it could be part of that protocol and therefore emphasize at the same time to what Kellyanne's saying, the public policy that this is a death penalty drug, that this is such a serious, deadly drug that it's used for the death penalty protocol by the federal government. We didn't end up going with that. We used the previous death penalty protocol. But that being said, that's how powerful and potent it is. As the two doctors, I'm sure, well know, and those of us that are parents are waking up to the reality of it. And the other thing that needs to be amplified is that the cartels in Mexico are trafficking so much that it almost numbs the mind, to Kellyanne's point, that enough has been seized at our border that it could have killed every American many times over. Now, that being said, we need to get control of the border. That's number one, because these cartels
Stop and clap.
Yeah.
That is the solution.
That is the solution, and that's why the statistics are so staggering today, that we have 100,000, 140,000, somewhere in that range of our fellow Americans dying because the border is so porous and these cartels are taking tremendous advantage. They'll send these groups to a certain area to draw the resources at the border and then move fentanyl through another place where law enforcement had to vacate to deal with these massive numbers. So this is all intentional, and it's all to drive the cartel's business, mostly in selling fentanyl. The other thing that street-level drug dealers know is that if you have a few fentanyl poisonings, that actually increases your business, because the addicts want there's a subset of addicts that go and flock to that dealer in hopes of getting the more powerful, potent drug. And it's not just pure, oxycodone laced. It's marijuana, it is cocaine, it is methamphetamine, more addictive, that makes it more and fatal. And so from a law enforcement perspective, we really, there's only one solution, and that is we have to secure our southern border. Once we do that, then we can start to mop up some of these challenges. But there is so much in our country right now that it's not going to go away overnight because it's already been imported. I think, President Trump has proposed a death penalty for drug dealers. Now, we already have a kingpin statute that does provide for a death penalty. It is not typically enforced, and it takes massive quantities. But in this case, where it is estimated that every drug dealer in America kills about 300 people in their career, I think that we need to reimagine the penalty for the people that are poisoning our fellow citizens. because it just keeps being mentioned. It's a 9/11. It's an airplane crash. It is that number, and the fact that it's not all happening at once in the same place, it's not getting the attention that it needs. But it is serious. We need more tools. I mean, the Narcan is good to have every law enforcement, EMT, to have first responders have that, not only to apply to victims of the poisoning, but to themselves in the case that they encounter it unknowingly. And we've seen those videos where police officers have overcome by their interdiction stops and what they've discovered in the cars. And so, I would say it's penalties. Scheduling certainly is one controlled substance. I think enhanced penalties for drug overdose deaths. I think a public as to the lethality of this. I think a public conversation, drugs and addiction and the solutions, because when you're addicted, to kick that, it's a lot of resources. It takes a lot of effort. It takes a lot of personal, will to make that happen. And we've just had too many of our fellow citizens not be able to do that. So I think, it needs to be a holistic approach. Law enforcement is one part of that, but it's not, we're not going to be able to arrest our way out of this. It's going to take a lot of other contributors as well.
Yeah, that's right. We've kind of covered a little bit of the solutions as far as what some of the current legislation that's being proposed. So the Halt Fentanyl Act, Senator, you've been a co-sponsor of that. That's passed the House by a large majority. It's in the Senate now. And then the Cooper-Davis Act that you mentioned is being marked up right now. And so the Halt Fentanyl Act, for everyone, does the permanent Schedule I substances for fentanyl-related substances, permanent Schedule I. And so that would create some of the enhanced penalties. General Whitaker, is there anything else you want to speak to just about that mechanism before we move on to?
Yeah, I would just make sure that they're, again, Congress, obviously, as a pure constitutionalist and as someone that believes in this system, everyone has their role. Executive branch has a role, legislative branch has a role. I would just be very careful in all these synthetic drugs to make sure that the analogs and the things that are not imagined today can be addressed in these bills, because there is a you change one carbon on the chain, as the doctors know, and all of a sudden it may be outside of the purview of these statutes. So we got to make sure that the efficacy of the drug and what it's designed to do is covered by these solutions.
Anything else, Senator, you want to mention on that?
I do. I want to take this home. It just seems like the cartel is always one step ahead of us. No matter what we do, no matter what law we write, until we control the border, I just feel like I'm treading water. And I've been to the border 4 times now. The last time I went there, the day before we got there, 10,000 illegal immigrants were apprehended at the border, but there were 3,000 gotaways. That's pretty much the ratio, 3 to 1. So we apprehended 10,000. 90% of our Border Patrol officers' time is babysitting, being a social worker, a nurse to the people we apprehended the day before. And we're just not going to get ahead of this until we control the border. Kellyanne, they had apprehended 8,000 Chinese nationalists as well this year, which no one is talking about that. What are Chinese nationalists doing crossing our border as well? So I just feel like I'm a tiger chasing my tail until we control the border. That's where the action is. The legislation that we have, one other piece would be to make the cartel terrorist. That would give your Treasury Department to go after them a little bit more. Making it a fentanyl, a Schedule I drug, it makes sense, but I'm just putting my finger in the dike. And that's what's so frustrating. How does the current person that's sitting in the White House sleep at night? How does he sleep at night knowing that 300 Americans are going to die today, tomorrow, yesterday? How does he sleep at night knowing what's coming across that border? It is just beyond me that we're allowed to do this. The Secretary of DHS, how is he still the Secretary? Why isn't he being impeached? Is he doing his job, Matt?
No, absolutely not.
He's breaking the law. His job by law is to secure the border. And there's not an American in the world that thinks he's securing the border.
We won't even call it a crisis.
It's not even a crisis yet as well. this is one of the few issues that I've seen going to the border that the media actually underplays the crisis that we're seeing. 20 truckloads of fentanyl have been apprehended at the border. 20 truckloads, 2,000-pound trucks, if you total it up. And then I'm going to still say triple of that has gotten through this very open, porous border. We have to secure the border. That's other legislation, of course, that the House has passed, I believe, is legislation, and we offered it as an amendment, but it went down. And even senators who are up for re-election from a border state or from a very red state voted against securing the border. So there's talk from our folks across the aisle, but when it comes time to vote, they all jump in line and say, come across. Like you said, 6 million people come across the border illegally. That's twice this population of Kansas.
That's right, Senator, and that's one of the main goals of our work at AFPI, and the book that you have is trying to connect all of those dots and really say, we have to defeat the cartels. We have to end human trafficking. You have to defeat the cartels. It's all part of the solution set that's needed for the fentanyl crisis that's affecting every American, every community. Well, let's pivot a little bit.
Can I say one thing on that? Because I think it's so important. We don't need to wait for Congress to do some of these things. I mean, it's to your point, it is, they have the tools, they have the resources, they have the manpower. They're choosing not to do it. It's an intentional act that is killing our fellow citizens, and they need to be held accountable for that. It's the bottom line.
That's exactly right. Well, on the public health side, we do want to talk a little bit about the solutions and some of that. We've certainly established the fentanyl poisoning piece. I wanted to highlight a statistic for you that has been so troubling to me doing the search, Kellyanne. Our two centers collaborated and have released a research report on fentanyl poisonings. But in 2021, there were 133 children under the age of 5 that died from fentanyl overdose. Under the age of 5. 93 1 to 5-year-olds and 40 infants. So exactly, how does that happen? They're being exposed to fentanyl in settings that they should be safe in, either in their homes with their parents who might be using, or in one case in Florida, a family went on vacation. They tried to take a nice family vacation together. The toddler went down for a nap and never woke up because 2 nights before in the Airbnb that their family rented for their nice escape, there had been a large party and fentanyl powder and residue had been left over. And she died of a fentanyl overdose while her family was on vacation. That's happening in America. And so we want to establish, again, the new face of, and that fentanyl poison can touch everyone, and has touched everyone in our country. And so, and when we think about that solution set, again, the public health solutions that we need, one of the things that we've talked about here is the opioid reversal agents. Narcan is the brand name, naloxone is the generic name, and making that more available in public spaces and making sure people know about it as a resource. You know, we have defibrillators everywhere. We could, if something happened, Senator Marshall and I and some other doctors in the room would know how to use a defibrillator and respond to an emergency. Narcan is a life-saving tool just like that. So can you speak to that solution set and why that's one of our recommendations for this current crisis?
This is truly a no-brainer to have Narcan, naloxone more readily available, to have it in your purse or in your car, and publicly anywhere where you see defibrillators, EpiPens, any kind of life-saving device. Because the chances now are, in some places and spaces, you'll be more likely to encounter somebody who's overdosing in front of you than somebody who is having a heart attack or seizing. That's just a statistical fact. So I think it's just inertia more than anything. There's not a great deal of resistance, so to speak, on one side of the aisle or from this state or that state. It's just a shrug-shouldered, you know, where there needs to be raised eyebrows, there's shrug shoulders. It's inertia, and as we all know, especially in this town, inertia is the most powerful physical force unless and until overtaken by friction. The friction is right here, folks. It's the 193 kids under the age of 5 having died of fentanyl. The other way some of them are dying is some of the parents have, which is controlled for their age and their height and their diet. The infant will go sleep with them or whatever the fancy terms are these days. Some of them have died. So there's case after case after case digging through the trash, et cetera. But I think what we need to do as a society is encourage addition, not subtraction on this one, which is just to partner with these major companies. And I have to say, I have to give them credit. I'm not sure their board members or even some of their C-suite executives were supportive of our administration per se, but they were very, very supportive of this issue. We had Google very helpful to us on Take Back Day, hiring 14 new people just to work on Take Back Day. We had record number of collection of drugs and medical devices. We had Walmart, Walgreens, CVS, Emergent Biosolutions, everybody really stepping up and stepping in, Leidos, and doing a little bit of their part. Some of them have donated on their own, just donated. We can't compel them in the government. Narcan, naloxone, to the public libraries, to the public schools, to our school nurses. But you can't compel them to take it. So many of it's made available to them, and so many of them have never even asked for that inventory, asked for that, and say, oh, I didn't know. I had no idea. Now, when COVID hit, everybody knew that they wanted to test, where to get a test, how to get a test, when to get tested. This is an ongoing epidemic. This is an ongoing crisis in our country. And I just want to repeat that Surgeon General Jerome Adams issued the first Surgeon General's advisory in over a decade, when in about April of 2018, he gave a very long advisory talking about the benefits of Narcan. And he mentioned fentanyl, he mentioned opioids. Again, didn't get as much coverage as some other things. But the other way to do it, too, is to build on the work that we did at the White House. We had something called Share Your Story, and we called it the Crisis Next Door. And Crisis Next Door, Share Your Story was really meant to bust through the stigma and the silence that attaches to the drug crisis, including fentanyl poisoning. Many people do not want to come here as you have today and talk about their 31-year-old son, and I give you a ton of credit. And they should be respected also for not wanting to come forth. But those who do, in the service of helping others, of just saving a few lives. Last point, a woman named Madonna, when she otherwise isn't threatening to, quote, blow up the White House on Inauguration Day 2017, she, last week or this month or recently, was given Narcan to reverse an overdose. That's in the news, maybe not enough, but we should mention that. So I think some high-profile examples of what would have happened to Prince if somebody were in that elevator in his home with him, what would have happened to Tom Petty perhaps would have happened to, and don't even bother if your family and friends get my name out of your mouth. I'm making the point that they could have been saved if this was more readily available. So I wish I had them to show you. I mean, some of them look like a sinus inhaler, whatever that is, and others are just a simple little thing. And last point, I said that before, but this is important. Some prescribers now, there you go, thank you, are co-prescribing. Some prescribers are co-prescribing Narcan with the opioids because they recognize that there may be a chance for accidental poisoning. Something that's really changed, and there were a couple governors who led the way in these state legislatures, Democrat and Republican, frankly, it was very bipartisan, is to go from the 30 pills that was customary to 15, 7 to 5, one state tried 3. If you need more, you're going to get more, I promise you. But it's after your pain is gone and you have that drug laying around because you want to save the $10 from your copay if you ever need it again. It's too easy. Days 8 to 30 is where all the trouble begins because you left all those pills in your gym bag, in your medicine cabinet, etc. But co-prescribing is a good idea too. The things we're talking about, Narcan and naloxone, very low cost, very high reward.
Cody, let me just make a couple explanation points on the Narcan issue. I'm very proud. The Doc Caucus working with the FDA. It's now over the counter, so a big success for us. Again, it just needs to be made easy access. I talked about one person in Kansas dies every day from fentanyl poisoning. We're using Narcan 10 to 15 times a day, which shocked me how often it is. Kansas, 1% of the population, a quick math, So 1,000 times a day we're using Narcan across the country. Or there'd be another 1,000 people that are dying every day from that. That's the epidemic that we're talking about, that it's impacting thousands of people every day as well. And then it just needs to be accessible. So several years ago, we started reaching out to our schools anywhere we can and just saying basically, if you don't have Narcan available in your schools, then you're not doing your job. And like Kellyanne pointed out, we've been able to find different companies, different resources to help pay for it. It is now, I think, pretty much common practice that our schools do have the Narcan in it, making sure our EMS folks are carrying it with them. They've had shortages as well. ER doctors are even sending home patients with it because these are usually repeat customers in our business.
Absolutely. Well, we covered, yes, one of my entry points into the policy world was exactly this issue. And seeing the co-prescription of naloxone was piloted at Hopkins 5 years ago. And to see the difference of how you get to educate a patient when you prescribe the oxycodone after surgery and they need it, but you're also giving the naloxone, educating them on proper storage, getting rid of any excess pills. Here's Narcan. It raises the seriousness of the medications that you're prescribing. So all very important solution sets. Like you said, Narcan will be available over the counter for the first time later this summer. And so really changing the availability of the medication that people can use in all these settings. So wanted to cover, Mary Beth, with you, a topic that you've been working on. You know, we always try to think about all of the tools that we have in the toolbox. And we have, in our documents and everything, AFPI is recommending Narcan in public places and all of those things. There's other conversations that are happening on what are other tools in the toolbox that we should be talking about. And one of the things that works so well in America is seeing what are states doing, what are local communities doing. And so you have been very involved in one of the tools. Fentanyl test strips is something that is one of those conversation points that we're talking about. What are the tools in the toolbox? And you were very involved in a bill that Governor DeSantis just signed in Florida to join 35 other states in removing fentanyl test strips from drug paraphernalia laws. And so I wanted you to share a little bit about that experience with us, because we are trying to start that dialogue on how do we think about all the tools in the toolbox, and why is it important for local communities and states to start exploring those options.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, I had the opportunity to testify in Tallahassee at the House and also then the Senate in support of legalizing fentanyl test strips. Obviously, I would like for people not to take the drug, and if they test it, of course, and there's fentanyl in it, not to take it. But if we can save a life, if someone doesn't take that drug because they tested it, then they can maybe go back into rehab. Or if they're that young person who's got a pill from a friend that, will help them study for their test. And it's okay, I got it from a friend I trust, and they tested it, then they don't take it. Then they think twice. Wow. Obviously, any illicit pill that you don't get from a prescribed, from your physician is a danger. But they have done surveys for people with substance use disorders who say they will use fentanyl testing strips if they're legal. And so it's just one other tool. These tools have to evolve. But if it can save just one life, if my son had that, maybe he would have tested the drug he bought. Obviously, I would have loved for him to have a recovery buddy there with Narcan available, but he had a lot of shame. He was very shamed that he had this issue, and he just couldn't get over that, despite the love and support of his family and telling him often, you can tell us, you can call the 800 number for the substance abuse and mental health line if you don't call us, or call a friend. But he couldn't do it. So maybe if it had been legal in Florida, maybe he would have used it. So it is a tool in the toolkit. That's why I was supportive of it, because it could save one life. And yes, it has to evolve. How they work might be a little bit cumbersome right now, I understand, to use, but somebody might use them. So if they're legal, let's make that tool in the toolkit. And I really believe that there needs to be grassroots community involvement in this crisis too. I know we're looking at what we need to do in states and federal, but we need to communities need to come together and have a conversation about this. if you're with your friends, this is available. These are legal. Use this. Have Narcan available. We started a foundation. We had a big golf event in West Palm Beach. We gave out Narcan to every participant. They were all trained in how to use it. So we really were trying to get the local communities involved and say, carry this. It's okay to use. Carry it. Have it available. Talk to your kids about it. Tell them what it is. Talk to them about this crisis. You know, tell them that fentanyl test strips are legal now in Florida, what they why you would want to use them. And I just, appreciated the opportunity to go there and advocate for legalization in Florida, like 35 other states, as you were saying, because it's just one more tool in this toolkit of fighting this crisis.
Yeah, thank you, Mary Beth. It's such an important conversation for us to have, and we have talked a little bit about they're cumbersome to use, and so technology solutions would also be great, as we're better ways to detect fentanyl would be awesome lines of innovation for companies to pursue, both for law enforcement and for every individual that we've described here. We do have some examples of Narcan nasal spray from Texas Against Fentanyl, who we are excited to collaborate with. AFPI is today, we're really excited to get to do a special training for interns and college students with Dr. Caldwell, the Chief Medical Officer, just because we want to put this into practice of we are here presenting solutions. We know that our interns and college students, when they go back to school in the fall, are very likely to come into situations like this, and having a life-saving option in your purse is something that, again, we can be part of a solution with so many other, right? It has to be a comprehensive, multi-pronged approach, but this is part of it. You mentioned the education efforts. So we've talked a little bit today about DEA's One Pill Can Kill effort. I would say maybe General Whitaker, can you speak a little bit to just that from the law enforcement side, how it's so important to provide that kind of education to the law enforcement, and then we'll cover it with Kellyanne with the kids and social media, and then we'll get into a few questions.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of opportunities across all the domains to educate. Certainly, law enforcement training is one of the most important things because we are asking so much from our police officers. They're on the front lines of mental health issues, of domestic violence, of the opioid crisis. There's so many things we expect of them, and in that I think we need to train much better than we probably have in the past, and this is certainly one of the areas that we need to focus training for, the police officers and the sheriff's deputies that are out there on the front line. Because the federal government, we always used to say, we were 912. The locals are 911. That's who shows up. The feds show up. We're from the federal government. We're here to help. And that usually always got a laugh. And I see that some of you got the joke as well. But I do want to take this moment. We talked about scheduling fentanyl. We talked as a Schedule I controlled substance. We talked about securing our southern border. Those are probably the two primary things. But this administration hasn't made this a priority. And, law enforcement, and I know Pam understands this as well, and so many don't, that you, as Attorney General, as President, you pick your priorities. You focus your resources because there are limited resources. We're never going to be able to do everything. This administration, the Biden administration, has not made this a priority, and has not focused resources, has not looked for creative ways, has not surged AUSAs and DEA agents and others that could work and address this challenge. And so much of it is, words are one thing, but actions are much more important. And the actions that this administration could take would be to prioritize this crisis and to secure the southern border. Both they are failing at.
Great. Kellyanne, anything you want to add on how the importance of educating children? Stephanie Turner shared earlier today about Tucker's Law in Texas that's now providing education grades 6 through 12 in Texas. But those campaigns and getting it into our kids.
Yes, and let me just say, I don't think Hunter Biden's father is ever going to take the drug crisis seriously and do much about it. That's just a fact. Then we have the vice president, just a way to make every woman in the room feel smarter. I just thought I'd say her name. See, it worked, Linda, and you didn't need it. You didn't need it. She's the border czar, whatever that means. We gave her a Russian title to combat a Mexican and Chinese problem. And we see how that's gone. So it all sounds funny until it's not. But if you're not going to have voice and visibility at the highest echelons of government, which we did have in the prior administration, you can't expect other people to follow suit. Now, on the issue of what we could do on social media, a Section 230 really does exclude from liability some of the tech companies. I'm not sure that they're liable in some of these cases anyway. I'll leave that to other authorities for another time. But what they could do is what we had many of them doing and helping us, like Google, Snapchat, Instagram, Facebook, Amazon. They all came to the White House and sat in the Roosevelt Room and said, how can we help? And they did help. But they're not being asked to help this time. And they're not being asked to continue. Some of them are continuing anyway on their own. But I don't even think you have to compel them before you invite them to help. They have the tools. They're able to ferret this out. I think one thing they can absolutely do that's in our handy pamphlet, take one home, share it, is to make them more, to encourage them to hold the drug kingpins and the international drug dealers and people who are preying upon folks using social media. Now, if you're a young person, technology is your native tongue. And social media is where you already receive so many positive things in your life: education, information, entertainment, a feeling of belonging. So that's why they're going there for their purchases. That's why they're going there for their information. But I think a lot of good can be done. Look, Google committed their entire ban for us to Take Back Day several times. Amazon put information on their boxes. You may have noticed it, you may not have. But that was all. They did that. I'm sure it cost them money. It was free to us in the government. It takes a 4-letter word called will. It really does. And you know, if we're out there telling young people and not so young people that this is something that could help them, this is something they need to know. And by the way, after Gen Z and millennials are telling pollsters everywhere all the time that they are suffering from the sustained effects of lockdowns and letdowns, yes, lost learning, declining test scores, but more importantly, they are reaching out and saying, I have some emotional struggles, I have some mental health concerns because of all of that. And nobody's really stopped, I think this administration's not stopped to even meet those needs. So there's a great opportunity, but I think these private-public partnerships are very important. I think using social media as a force for good and encouraging them, maybe even encouraging them with little teeth, Senator, to respectfully to get involved and to get these messages out there. We had the major sports teams come in. They said, how can we help? Major League Baseball put an ad about fentanyl and opioids at a Super Bowl game, World Series game. My son and I were there here at Nationals Park. They ran it, again, for free. It cost them money, cost us nothing. So they may not come to us. We need to go to them. But I found that even asking, inviting them, giving them some facts and figures, and maybe a couple of options of how they could be helpful. They already have the customer base. They can read the room. They already are trusted by so much of our youth. It's really time to ask them to, I think, deepen and widen their involvement.
Thank you, Kellyanne. I think we have time for a few questions here. So see, we can take some from the audience. Dr. Caldwell.
Good morning. Colonel Dr. Peter Caldwell, and as already previously mentioned, I'm the medical director for Anyplace MD. I've just got a quick statement. There is a training session that's already set up for after this for interns and college students, but we do have additional Narcan packets that we have a few extra. If there's anybody in this audience that would like to take one home, we can arrange for that to happen. And I also have a question for General Whitaker. So I've just spent the past 42 years of my life in Homeland Defense, serving the United States Army in foreign countries. I retired last year. I've just completed a master's in Homeland Security because I now see the Homeland Security front as my new calling and the importance of that. And I've listened to a lot of folks talking about the Chinese influence today, and I I can tell you from my studies of the past 2 years and some of the classified briefings that I've had the ability to attend during my military career, that is certainly legitimate. So I feel that what is going on now with the drugs that are coming across the border is essentially a part of a proxy war. And my question for you is, do you think that that is too strong a sentiment to classify the fentanyl crisis as a proxy war that China is waging upon the United States of America?
Well, first of all, thank you for your dedicated service to our country. A grateful country thanks you. Thank you. And to all veterans and active military, we are so appreciative that you're willing to stand in the gap, and it's so important. I don't think that overstates it. I think the Chinese are intentionally using our open and free society against us. And, you know, it's famously said 20 years ago, when confronted with the supply coming out of Mexico of illegal drugs, a Attorney General asked the Mexican Attorney General, what are you going to do about it? And they said, what are you going to do about your demand problem? And so it is two sides of a coin, but it is being exploited. Our open and free society is being exploited by our adversaries, including the Chinese. And it's not just limited to the Chinese, but they're experts, not only in the activities that are doing that, but the propaganda associated with it. I think a lot of the current culture wars are being amplified by our adversaries, and are causing divisions in our country that wouldn't necessarily be there if it weren't for the amplification and the strategic use of again, our greatness against ourselves.
Make no mistake about it, this is China's revenge of the Opium War. Make no mistake about it, culturally, that's what this is about. I think, again, we understate the sophistication of the supply chain of getting these precursors from China to Mexico. They send Chinese pharmacists to work with the cartel. And literally, I've seen the supply chains come up, 3 arteries, 3 highways out of Texas that go through Kansas. So no doubt that this is a very, again, sophisticated supply chain. Just like Kansans grow wheat and send it across the world, China sits there and says, here's a great product we can export to Americans and kill 2 birds with 1 stone.
Great, thank you. And I would call attention to the Combating Fentanyl book that you have. The introduction letter from our president and CEO, Brooke Rollins, mentions exactly that, the history of the Opium War and putting into historical context the problem that we're facing today. Do you want to share a bit of good news here with everyone and congratulate the senator? We just got word your bill passed out of committee 16-5, so congratulations.
Wow. How about that? That is incredible. Thank you. I can't believe it. And I just got to compliment my staff. My staff, Charlotte Panetta and my whole team has just dedicated 2 years to do this. What I thought was a slam dunk. That's incredible. Yeah, so the Cooper Davis bill was to force social media companies to be proactive with law enforcement when they see this fentanyl being sold online.
That's awesome.
See, we're a do tank, not just a think tank. We get things done while we're having these discussions.
Yeah, and I just got to, the do part of this is, again, I underestimated a doctor becoming a senator is what an organization like AFPI can do behind the scenes to push some fellow Republicans across the line. Because you sit there and say, theoretically, I don't want to ever interfere with business, but, above all, do no harm. So we need associations like this out there, covering my right flank, working on my left flank as well to get something like this across the committee. Now we got to get it to the floor somehow. We'll see if Senator Schumer and this president will show some leadership and get this across the finish line.
That's exactly part of the goal for today is to create that demand and to work with people like Mary Beth and Stephanie and the groups that you have set up from grassroots to say Americans are done with tolerating this crisis and this epidemic that's happening in our country. We're going to fight for our kids. We're going to fight for our kids in the school boards. We're going to fight for our kids from every platform that we can, including on social media. In the exam room as doctors, we're going to make protecting kids our priority for our country. So stand with you, Senator. Thank you for being here. Glad to share that moment with you. And certainly all of the people that have shared their story here today. We're so grateful. So I think any final words from any panelists?
You know, just to highlight what you said, I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. And let's turn that tired into inspiration. Take what we talked about today and inspire others to share this message and save the lives of young adults throughout America. Thank you.
Amen.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Can I just say one thing? I'm sorry. I mean, this is the worst thing is to be the last person to speak between a crowd and lunch. And so, you know, I understand that. But I think the next administration, whoever takes over in 2025, has to really think about the following question. And that is, what is our relationship with China? Why are they part of the World Trade Organization? Why do they have access to our U.S. Postal Service to drop ship products? Why are we still a strategic trading partner with China? I think these are the questions. And are we willing to sacrifice 140,000 Americans every year in the interests of having the most efficient supply chain in the world? I don't know if it's worth it.
Mary Beth, do you have something any final thoughts for us?
We have to keep banging the drum, you know, keep it in the forefront, contact your representatives, talk to your churches, talk to your family members, keep them calling, keep demanding. Like you said, we got to hold them accountable. We're not going to take this anymore. This is our country, our children, it's our lives. We have to make it a priority. We have to make them make it a priority. You know, part of me wonders, you know, if the border was secure, would my son and many others who have died in the last 2 years maybe made it? Maybe they'd be alive. Maybe they would have gone back into recovery, or they wouldn't have been a young person who took a pill before a test. They'd still be alive. So let's get it back on track. Again, having this organization, the American First Policy Institute, hold this forum is wonderful, because I think a lot of, you know, awareness and solutions are coming out of it, and I so appreciate being part of it. But if you all could just go out there and be ambassadors for this cause, we raise our voices together, we're going to make a difference. We're going to save lives.
Well said. Thank you.
You're good, you're good. For the music plays us out, let me again thank everyone for coming. Let's give another round of applause to both of our panelists, our moderators. Appreciate that. Let me recognize, I'm only going to hold you for another couple minutes. I know it's late. Let me recognize and thank again Stephanie Turner and Mary Beth Creighton for your powerful testimonies. I think those were inspiring. I'm a father of a 15 and 16-year-old, so for those of us that have younger children, it's a very sobering situation that they outlined, and so I want to thank them for that. Let me thank Chairman Mark Green, Senator Roger Marshall for their leadership on Capitol Hill, not only to secure the border, to defeat the cartels, but to bring a lot of leadership to this issue. Let me also thank Attorney General Yost and Rodney Scott, not only for your dedicated service to this nation, but also for what you do to keep the American people safe and for speaking the truth. Today's discussion and AFPI's action plan shows us that there is a way forward. We need to get tough on China. We need to secure our border. We need to create enhanced penalties, and we need to optimize public health, education, so our country can turn the tide. America has the potential to rise to any challenge, and this is just how our nation can meet that moment. Dr. Overton mentioned we're going to put this into practice. AFPI is hosting a private training for interns, students, and others on the opioid overdose response, including how to administer Narcan. We're doing the collaboration with the Texas Against Fentanyl, and is intended to further our commitment to give people the tools they need to save a life from this poison. So again, thank you for attending here. Thanks for being online, for those that are live streaming. And I hope you stay inspired to help us continue this America First action plan and turn it into reality. So thank you.